Hey everyone, per your requests, I'm starting Sword of Coming, chapters 661 through 670 of the previous episode. Chen Ping'an, traveling with Pei Qian, Zhulian, and Shi Rou, accepts an invitation from cave spirit True Lord Wu Yi to visit the prestigious Purple Sun residence. Lodged in a treasure-filled pagoda, Chen Ping'an uses the opportunity to reflect on his journey, content with his path while remaining grounded. At a grand banquet held in his honor, Wu Yi treats him as her most esteemed guest, shifting the power dynamic in the hall. When a local river goddess is humiliated by Wu Yi, Chen Ping'an calmly reinforces table manners with Pei Qian, maintaining absolute composure amidst the hidden currents of the cultivation world. If possible, you can support me via PayPal or become a channel member to help me keep this channel running. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Sword of Coming audio series. Chapter 671. The atmosphere in the deathly silent vast snow hall was extremely heavy. Meanwhile, Lady Xiaoluan continued to hold the cup of wine that she didn't have the opportunity to drink. After finally bending down and placing the cup of wine on the table, she did something strange, walking over to Sun Dengxian and the elderly cultivator's tables to grab 2 pots of wine. There were now 3 pots of wine in front of her, and she lifted one up before removing its clay seal and holding it in her arms. The pot of wine weighed roughly 1.5 kilograms, and she said to Wu Yi, "The White Swan River accepts the 3 cups of wine from Sect Master Huang. The Purple Sun residence is showing its magnanimity and not being unforgiving to me. However, I also want to drink 3 pots of punishment wine to apologize to Cave Spirit True Lord. At the same time, I wish True Lord a speedy advance to the upper 5 tiers." Afterward, Xiaoluan unexpectedly suppressed the power of her godly body, essentially suppressing her cultivation as the river goddess of the White Swan River and making her the same as an ordinary martial artist. She then downed the 3 pots of wine with no pause. Xiaoluan's face was bright red, and when she raised the pots of wine and tilted her head back to gulp down the contents, it was inevitable that some wine spilled onto her extravagant palace attire. Her upper garment became slightly soaked, and she quickly turned her head and raised a hand to cover her mouth. Pei Qian's mouth was agape as she looked at the incredible woman in the distance. To say nothing of 3 pots of old flood dragon yearning wine, she couldn't even down a small pot of floral fruit wine. She hurriedly grabbed her cup and poured herself some fruit juice, wanting to take a sip to suppress her astonishment. Chen Ping'an chuckled to Pei Qian and said, "That's enough, don't overdo it." Wu Yi was observing Chen Ping'an again, and she immediately narrowed her eyes upon hearing this. She looked at the river goddess who didn't dare to sit down, and she nodded and said, "You've accepted both a toast and punishment wine now, so this is quite good. We're no longer strangers, and the White Swan River and the Purple Sun residence can essentially be viewed as relatives in the future. That being the case, remember to visit during the New Year and other festivals. However, I need to remind Lady Xiaoluan that you only obtained this opportunity today thanks to young Master Chen, so are you not going to say something about this?" As she said this, Xiaoluan picked up another pot of wine and broke open its seal with her fingers. However, it was clear that her fingers were already trembling slightly. Chen Ping'an stood up with a wine cup in his hand, and he looked at the pot of wine in the river goddess' hands before glancing down at his own cup of wine. He suddenly turned around and smiled at Wu Yi, saying, "True Lord, my drinking capacity is only a so-so, so how about Lady Xiaoluan and I only drink a cup of wine each? Otherwise, it won't sit well with me if I only drink a cup of wine while Lady Xiaoluan drinks an entire pot of wine. In the future, I won't even dare to visit Lady Xiaoluan when I pass the White Swan River after visiting the Purple Sun residence." There was a solemn look in Wu Yi's eyes, and she chuckled in response. "That won't do, young Master Chen. Xiaoluan honored me with 3 pots of wine, so how can she only honor you with a single cup of wine? That's completely unacceptable. What's wrong, young Master Chen? Are you thinking of protecting and cherishing a beautiful lady? In fact, that will work quite nicely as well, and we can use wine as a matchmaking medium. Lady Xiaoluan has been single for many years after all, while young Master Chen is a giant among men." Chen Ping'an hurriedly cut Wu Yi off, not allowing her to stray any further. He grabbed a pot of wine and cracked open the clay seal, seemingly pleading with Wu Yi as he said, "True Lord, I can't beat you in a debate, so I'll accept my punishment as well. I'll drink half a pot as punishment, and the remaining half can be viewed as a toast to Lady Xiaoluan. Wu Yi laughed heartily when she heard this. And thus, thundering laughter once again returned to the vast snow hall. Chen Ping'an faced Wu Yi and downed half the pot of wine in a single go, after which he turned around to face Lady Xiaoluan and raised the remaining half a pot of wine and said, "A toast to Lady Xiaoluan." Lady Xiaoluan once again downed a pot of wine in a single go. She no longer cared about her appearance or etiquette this time, and she hurriedly sat back down before turning her head and forcefully covering her mouth with her arm. The banquet returned to its boisterous state again following the conclusion of the farcical scenes. The graceful female cultivators busily served the guests. Some people had already left their seats, wandering around to drink with other guests. All of the middle 5-tier cultivators of the Purple Sun residence were present, after all, and many of them had hurried back from the cultivation abodes located near the sect. Those at the Sea Observation tier and Dragon Gate tier needed to cultivate in a slow and steady manner, so it was often the case that these high-tier cultivators wouldn't be seen for several years or several dozen years at a time. As for powerful nascent tier cultivators, they were much like elusive dragons hiding in the clouds. Lady Xiaoluan's maidservant leaned down and gently patted the river goddess back. Yet her hand was immediately flicked back by the river goddess aura, causing her to hurriedly retract it and fall silent in fear. New Epsilon. There was a look of hazy intoxication in Lady Xiaoluan's eyes, making her appear increasingly beautiful and attractive. She turned to Sun Dengxian and asked in a soft voice, "Dengxian, you're not going to drink with your friend?" There was a conflicted look on Sun Dengxian's face. It was difficult to say whether this was caused by Lady Xiaoluan being drunk, but her demeanor was completely different from her usual grace and dignity. Right now, she surprisingly appeared like a young and timid woman as she looked at Sun Dengxian with a pitiful expression. Sun Dengxian felt slightly helpless. He had no romantic feelings for Lady Xiaoluan, and he instead only felt respect toward her. However, how many heroic men could remain cold-hearted and unsympathetic after seeing a beautiful woman frown in anxiety, with pity glistening in her eyes? Thus, Sun Dengxian could only nod and stand up with his wine cup, preparing to make his way to the front of the banquet hall where Chen Ping'an was seated. This was the stubborn nature of Sun Dengxian. If you weren't aware that Chen Ping'an was the most esteemed guest of the Purple Sun residence, one whom even old ancestor Wu Yi had to please, and if Chen Ping'an were still a young 3rd or 4th tier wanderer like before, then Sun Dengxian would definitely walk over to drink and chat with Chen Ping'an even if the young man didn't walk over. After all, it was only natural to do so since they had reunited in the cultivation world. Now, however, Sun Dengxian felt extremely uncomfortable and nowhere near as carefree as normal. However, he quickly faltered in surprise. He looked forward, only to see the young man in white walking over with a tanned and happily skipping little girl. Chen Ping'an walked over to Sun Dengxian and said, "Chivalrous hero Sun, a toast to you." Sun Dengxian had felt slightly squeamish before, but now that Chen Ping'an had already walked over, he couldn't help but feel a little happy. His trip to the Purple Sun residence had been filled with grief and unhappiness, and it was rare for him to finally feel some comfort. Sun Dengxian smiled and stood opposite Chen Ping'an, clinking cups with him before downing the wine in his cup. When clinking cups, Chen Ping'an had lowered his cup slightly, and Sun Dengxian had felt wasn't appropriate. Thus, he had lowered his cup a little more than Chen Ping'an, yet Chen Ping'an had unexpectedly lowered his cup even further. Upon seeing this, Sun Dengxian had relented and accepted Chen Ping'an's expression of respect. Sun Dengxian had already drunk a lot of wine to suppress his frustrations tonight, so he was feeling slightly tipsy after drinking another cup of wine with Chen Ping'an. Because of this, some words quickly slipped off the tip of his tongue, and he said, "Chen Ping'an, where did you learn your drinking habits from? They're so tacky. In any case, I don't deserve such a show of respect." Lady Xiaoluan had already stood up, and Sun Dengxian's 2 other friends were also rendered speechless after seeing his crude carelessness. There was a bright glimmer in Chen Ping'an's eyes as he replied, "Chivalrous hero Sun definitely deserves it." Sun Dengxian was quite amused and he said, "I merely caught a fox spirit, so is there any need for you to think about it all the time?" Chen Ping'an didn't reveal his comprehension about the cultivation world, and he simply grabbed a pot of wine from someone's table and filled up his own cup before filling up Sun Dengxian's cup. The road of life might be narrow, but the wine cup is assuredly wide. Another toast to chivalrous hero Sun, he said with a smile. The two of them downed the wine in a single gulp again, and Sun Dengxian said with a hearty laugh, "Good one, you're quite skilled at convincing others to drink now, aren't you?" Qian Pingyan smiled widely, and his face was also bright red, having already drunk an entire pot of old flood dragon yearning wine just then. After a while, he said goodbye to Sun Dengxian, not making small talk with him for too long. He didn't speak a single word with Lady Xiaoluan. Before leaving, Qian Pingyan glanced over at the entrance. The steward who only had the right to stand guard over there was anxiously looking at Qian Pingyan and Lady Xiaoluan the entire time. After finally catching Qian Pingyan's gaze, he immediately bowed his head and bent his back. Qian Pingyan smiled and raised his empty wine cup. Only then did he return to his seat. The steward had been wallowing in fear the entire time, and after seeing Qian Pingyan's gesture, he was so moved that he almost shed tears of relief. Lady Xiaoluan remained in her seat and lowered her head, gently wiping the wine stains on her garment. At the same time, she lightly exhaled a breath of wine and impurity. There was something even more terrifying than gulping down punishment wine, as if one's life depended on it. That was, the other party might only give one the opportunity to drink a few ounces of wine, even if one wanted to drink hundreds upon thousands of ounces of punishment wine. The maidservant looked at the disappearing young man, and after contemplating things for a moment, she felt a slight sense of gratitude toward him. Pei Qian looked up and asked in curiosity, "That old geezer was looking down on us so much, yet master still doesn't feel angry?" Qian Pingyan smiled and replied, "There's nothing to be angry about. Master is acting in the best interests of chivalrous hero Sun and his friends, right?" Pei Qian asked in a quiet voice. Qian Pingyan gently smacked her head and replied, "You're the smartest one in the room, aren't you?" When they were only a few steps away from their seats, Pei Qian suddenly grabbed Qian Pingyan's warm hand, causing him to ask in puzzlement, "What's the matter?" Pei Qian giggled and replied, "I'm trying to obtain some of my kind-hearted master's immortal aura and chivalrous aura." Qian Pingyan smiled and said, "That's right, you can also obtain free food and free drinks from me all the time. So where else are you going to find such a good master?" "Master, can I drink a tiny bit of old flood dragon yearning wine? It's so fragrant and I truly want to take a sip," Pei Qian asked in a careful voice. "What do you think?" Qian Pingyan replied. Pei Qian nodded and said, "I feel like I can drink a small cup. After all, the road of life might be narrow, but the wine cup is assuredly wide." Qian Pingyan twisted her ear and tossed her back onto the small chair in front of her small and unique table, saying, "Go and drink your fruit juice." Qian Pingyan was just about to sit down, yet Wu Yi had already stood up from her chair and walked over. She waved her hand, gesturing for the vast snow hall that had instantly fallen silent to continue drinking and chatting. After the banquet hall became boisterous again, Wu Yi asked using her mind's voice, "Young Master Qian, have you killed a large number of flood dragon kin before?" Qian Pingyan shook his head in response. Back at the flood dragon trench, it wasn't him who had personally killed the elderly nascent tier flood dragon. He suddenly recalled the eel demon that he had encountered at the border of the Parasol Leaf Continent's Great Quan Empire, and he was indeed the one who had personally fought and killed the demon. Qian Pingyan frowned and asked, "True Lord, perhaps you've noticed something?" Wu Yi felt slightly displeased upon seeing Qian Pingyan shake his head, yet upon recalling the two letters that were even more authoritative than imperial edicts, she could only remain patient and explain, "It's not my place to ask about young Master Chen's past, but I can tell that young Master Chen is contaminated with a noticeable amount of bad karma." "What does that imply?" Qian Pingyan asked in curiosity. Wu Yi smiled and replied, "Regarding the demons in the world, killing some of them might return good karma, while killing some of them might return bad karma. The Confucian sect has always kept this a secret, so it's understandable that young Master Chen might not be aware of it. Are there any methods to address this issue and eliminate the bad karma?" Qian Pingyan directly asked. Wu Yi gave Qian Pingyan a hint, saying, "There's no hurry, especially since young Master Chen is going to stay at the Purple Sun residence for 1 or 2 more days. I'll discuss these matters with you when you become sober again. You can focus on drinking tonight, and we'll refrain from discussing these heavy matters." All feasts had to come to an end. Wu Yi was the first to leave the banquet hall. Shortly afterward, Qian Pingyan also left the vast snow hall with Pei Qian and the others, returning to the Purple Qi Palace. Pei Qian was still filled with energy and excitement, and she didn't forget to grab her hiking pole as she hummed a tune that she had made up by herself. Of course, the lyrics were all sayings from the Dragon Spring Prefecture that she had heard from her master. The Lightning Lord is singing today, yet the rain is still little tomorrow. Sparrows flying low and snakes slithering along, ants moving homes and mountains wearing hats. The moon becomes hazy, the heavy downpour creates a trench. Carp spots in the sky. No need to flip the sunbasking grains tomorrow. There was no end to her humming. Julien had grown tired of this tune long ago, so he begged. Can you please have mercy on me, gallant heroine Pei? Can you please have mercy on my ears? Pei Qian sighed in grief. However, she was in a fabulous mood tonight, so she decided to accept the old cook's request this one time. She dashed forward several steps on the serene path before brandishing her hiking pole and exclaiming, "Wild dogs bound around causing chaos in the world, while vile beasts are in power. It's because of this that the cultivation world is riddled with danger, and everyone is worried for their own safety. Yet I still haven't mastered my peerless sword techniques and saber techniques. It's my fault, it's all my fault." Julien kicked her in the backside. Pei Qian stumbled forward several steps before standing still and turning around with an angry expression, fuming. "What are you doing?" Julien was just about to tease her, yet he suddenly looked up and reached forward with a hand, murmuring, "Huh? It's raining." Chun Ping'an nodded in response. It had genuinely started to drizzle. They hastened their pace, briskly walking back to the treasure storage building. Shi Ro was a Yin entity who didn't need to sleep, so she decided to stand guard on the first floor of the building. Julien and Pei Qian stayed on the second and third floors respectively. Meanwhile, Chun Ping'an stood in a corridor on the fourth floor by himself. The rain tonight wasn't very heavy. He practiced walking meditation in the corridor for an hour and dissipated the alcohol in his system. Chun Ping'an then returned to his room to sleep, yet he only entered a very shallow stage of sleep. This was the Purple Sun residence, after all, and there was the unpredictable old ancestor in Wu Yi. It was after midnight, yet Chun Ping'an suddenly heard a soft knocking on his door. He got dressed and stood up, and he saw a most unexpected visitor after opening the door. It was Lady Xiao Luan, the river goddess of the White Swan River. There was a complicated look in her eyes, and she appeared as shy as could be. It looked like she wanted to speak, yet she couldn't help but hesitate. Not only that, but she was also wearing an extremely tight-fitting dress. She turned her head and bit her lip, finally summoning her courage and whispering in a mellow voice, "Young Master Chun." However, Chun Ping'an had already slammed the door shut. There was a stunned expression on Lady Xiao Luan's face as she stood outside the door. On the other side of the door, the young man said in an angry voice, "Please conduct yourself with dignity, Lady Xiao Luan." Lady Xiao Luan dazedly stood outside the door for a long time. While she was hesitating about whether she should knock again, she turned around and saw that hunchbacked and seemingly unremarkable old man. Lady Xiao Luan was skilled at reading the speech and expressions of other people, and when she had first encountered this old man in the corridor to the vast snow hall, she had noticed that he was significantly concealing his strength, from his breathing all the way to his footfalls. He had purposely suppressed his martial arts cultivation base to the 5th tier. After silently appearing on the 4th floor of the Purple Qi Palace, however, he was now radiating with a martial arts aura similar to that of Sun Dengxian. Judging from this, it was very clear that this old man was a shrewd and calculating person. The river goddess could only tell that the old subordinate was a superior martial arts grandmaster, who was stronger than Sun Dengxian. However, she couldn't tell whether he had already advanced to the Vajrabhati tier, nor could she tell if he had reached the spirit refining tiers and was advancing toward the end tier of martial arts. Since Lady Xiao Luan couldn't determine the cultivation base of this pure martial artist, it was a clear sign that she needed to be vigilant. The hunchbacked old man's smile almost gave Lady Xiao Luan goosebumps, and the words that came out of his mouth made her feel even more uncomfortable. "Lady Xiao Luan, were you denied an audience by my young master? Don't feel bad, my young master has always been, and he isn't specifically targeting Lady Xiao Luan." Lady Xiao Luan's expression remained calm and composed, and she looked for the right words in her mind before saying with a faint smile, "Old mister, it suddenly started to rain tonight, and you should also be aware that a river deity like me will naturally feel a sense of intimacy with the rain. After finally dispersing the alcohol in my body with much difficulty, I seized the opportunity to go on a midnight stroll around the Purple Chi Palace, and I coincidentally saw your young master practicing fist techniques in the corridor on the 4th floor. I initially thought that young Master Chun was a cultivator, a young sword immortal with a bright future. Yet I was surprised to discover that young Master Chen's fist intent was actually so impressive. In fact, young Master Chen's fist intent is no inferior to any grandmaster in the Yellow Court Nation. I was genuinely curious, so I took the liberty and decided to visit. Please forgive my intrusion. Lady Xiaoluan was unwilling to interact with the hunchbacked old man any further, especially since it was clear that she could no longer complete her objective. Thus, there was no need to waste any more time here. Moreover, was she truly so vulgar and shameless? She was the formal god of the 3rd largest river in the Yellow Court Nation, and was only slightly inferior to the mountain gods of the 5 mountains. If it weren't for the domineering nature of Wu Yi and the Purple Sun residents, and their alliance with the Greatly Empire giving them the backing of the unstoppable trend, Lady Xiaoluan should have enjoyed the same respect and treatment as Chan Ping'an in any banquet in the Yellow Court Nation. In the end, Lady Xiaoluan said a few polite words before turning around and preparing to leave. Nothing had gone smoothly in the Purple Sun residence, and after leaving the Purple Chi Palace, there would still be more headaches waiting for her to deal with in a moment. Julian smiled with squinted eyes and said, "Please wait a moment, Lady Xiaoluan." Xiaoluan was extremely annoyed, yet she maintained her graceful and composed aura as she asked in puzzlement, "Is anything the matter, old mister? If it's nothing urgent, then you can look for me tomorrow." Julian shook his hand and said, "Old mister? No, compared to Lady Xiaoluan's extensive lifespan, I'm nothing more than a young boy who appears slightly older on the surface. Lady Xiaoluan can call me Little Zhu as in young and handsome. When the matter isn't urgent, and I just wanted to say that I didn't have the courage to raise a toast to Lady Xiaoluan in the vast snow hall tonight. However, since it's late at night and there's no one else around, I was thinking about taking a midnight stroll around the Purple Sun residence with Lady Xiaoluan. What does Lady Xiaoluan say?" Lady Xiaoluan felt extremely nauseous, even more so than after she had downed the 4 pots of old Flood Dragon yearning wine. Even so, she still smiled and replied, "It's getting very late, and I'm preparing to leave the Purple Sun residence early tomorrow morning to return to the White Swan River. I'm feeling a little tired, so I want to go back and get some rest. Please forgive me." Julian strode forward and said, "It's only natural that I forgive Lady Xiaoluan. Since this is the case, then please allow me to accompany Lady Xiaoluan back to her residence. I can't help but feel worried if Lady Xiaoluan is to return by herself. Lady Xiaoluan is breathtakingly beautiful, and even though it's said that stunning beauties possess an inviolable aura, I know that I'll feel extremely pained if some patrolling cultivator of the Purple Sun residence dares to steal a few extra glances at Lady Xiaoluan. No, I can't allow that to happen. Please don't worry about me, Lady Xiaoluan. I'll definitely accompany you back to your residence." Lady Xiaoluan dismissed this with a smile. However, even with her patience and good temper, she could barely contain herself from responding in a harsh manner. She directly turned around, neither accepting nor rejecting the hunchbacked old man's offer. She then leaped out of the building, with her slender and shapely figure instantly transforming into a streak of light as she dashed into the distance. The old man could try to chase her if he were so capable. Unexpectedly, however, Julian appeared beside her in a flash, also starting to ride on the wind alongside her. Lady Xiaoluan was astounded, so much so that she almost plummeted to the ground. This old pervert was actually an 8th-tier martial artist. The #1 martial artist who had been renowned throughout the cultivation world of the Yellow Court Nation for more than 40 years was only at the 7th tier, the Vajrabadi tier. Flying beside the river goddess of the White Swan River, Julian asked, "Lady Xiaoluan, I read in some book that rain and dew will fall in the world whenever flood dragons or water deities develop romantic feelings toward someone. Is this true?" Lady Xiaoluan felt both embarrassed and furious, and she deeply resented the person who had orchestrated the events tonight. At the same time, she felt an even stronger urge to pummel the old geezer beside her, and send him to the bottom of the White Swan River. She would then extract his soul and twist it into a wick, after which she would place it in a lantern that illuminated the entire river goddess residence. Julien continued to speak by himself, saying, Being able to go on a midnight stroll around the Purple Sun residence with Lady Xiaoluan is truly one of the most enjoyable things in life. You might laugh at what I'm about to say, but I, little Zhu, have always enjoyed writing travel journals to document the mountains and rivers and the people and matters. I've always wanted to print and publish my travel journal, and I feel fortunate moment with Lady Xiaoluan is one that must be recorded in great detail in my journal. After my travel journal is published, I'll definitely visit the White Swan River to personally give a copy to Lady Xiaoluan. Lady Xiaoluan was fuming in her mind, and this caused her breathing to become heavy and irregular, and her chest to rise and fall slightly. She was dressed far too skimpily tonight, but that person had forcefully given her these clothes and ordered her to wear them. Zhu Lian glanced at the towering and magnificent scene beside him before quickly turning around to gaze at the Iron Plate River. Such beautiful scenery, he remarked in a loud voice. Zhu Lian had already returned to his room on the second floor of the Purple Qi Palace. On the fourth floor of the treasure storage building, Qian Pingyan was no longer in the mood to sleep, so he decided to light a lamp and start to read. After reading for a moment, he said with lingering fear in his heart, "What did they say in the Cultivation novels? A hero will find it difficult to pass the trials of beautiful women? This river goddess is far too dishonorable. I helped you out of goodwill at the vast snow hall, so what reason do you have to entrap me? I've heard that chivalrous heroes don't allow debts of gratitude or enmity to remain overnight, so they choose to resolve everything on the day. Yet you're actually repaying me? Fucking hell, if I weren't worried about Zhu Lian becoming suspicious, then even rewarding you with a slap would have been a show of lenience. If word of this gets out, then it will be as if my crotch is stained with mud. People will call it shit even if it isn't, and I'll be labeled guilty even if I'm not." Qian Pingyan continued to mumble and curse the river goddess of the White Swan River as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. In the end, Qian Pingyan could only try to console himself by saying, "I didn't waste my time traveling through the river of time in the lotus flower-blessed land. If it were before that, I might have foolishly opened the door and allowed her inside." After gradually calming down, Qian Pingyan started to concentrate on reading. He was reading a Buddhist scripture, one of 6 books that he had borrowed from Mountain Cliff Academy's scripture library. The 6 books included classics from 5 different teachings in schools: Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, legalism, and Moism. Mountain Master Mao had told Qian Pingyan that there was no hurry to return these books, and that he could ask someone to deliver them back to the academy once he was confident that he had fully comprehended them. Qian Pingyan suddenly closed the book and walked out of his room, making his way to the railing in the corridor. There was definitely something fishy about this abnormal situation. The rain outside had already subsided, and there was nothing but the darkness of night. Qian Pingyan reached over and placed a hand on the railing, walking forward slowly and causing the beads of water to shatter and gather into one. The rainwater felt slightly cool against his palm. Qian Pingyan spread his palm open and looked down. He then jumped onto the railing and continued to walk forward slowly. Gazing into the distance, there was the Iron Plate River beyond the Purple Sun residence and green mountains beyond the river. Right now, he was standing on the railing on the 4th floor of the Purple Qi Palace located in the Yellow Court Nation's Purple Sun residence. His thoughts drifted away into the distance. Qian Pingyan recalled his trip through the Azure Phoenix Nation before, and the time when the commoners and restaurant customers had been discussing the grand debate between Buddhism and Taoism. They had mentioned a story about a monk walking through the rain with an umbrella, while a Confucian disciple had stood under the eaves to avoid the rain. If it started to rain while one was traveling, then it was only natural that one would seek shelter under the eaves. Qian Pingyan also recalled the words that Lu Tai had once spoken with emotion in the small courtyard at the Flying Eagle Fortress. Many disappointments in the world were born from the fact that one wouldn't be able to maintain things as they were. The most sincere words that one could speak were nothing more than telling the myriad of scenes and people to please slow down. Lu Tai had also said that it was incredibly difficult to truly feel empathy for all of the sufferings in the world. Thus, when hardship arrived and fell upon a certain individual, it was inevitable that people would feel flustered and unprepared. The profoundly powerful and no-name old Taoist priest from the so-called Observing Tao Temple was observing Tao through the lives of the myriad beings in the lotus flower-blessed land. It was evident that he could control the flow of time in the lotus flower-blessed land, commanding it to either speed up, slow down, or stop altogether. However, the raging flow of time in the four worlds was a completely different beast. To say nothing of controlling it, it was said that even the Tao ancestor wasn't able to slow it down for a brief moment. Thus, the paramount sage had once comprehended a principle while observing water, remarking that time passed by like water, flowing away day and night without pause. Cui Dongshan had once said that all immortal forces in the mountains and cities in the mortal world were mystical in their own way. At the same time, wars and the knowledge expounded by the 100 schools of thought all pertain to the speed at which time flowed. In other words, the sages were hoping to use an alternative method to seek so-called slowness. The sages of the three teachings were already standing at such a lofty height and gazing so far into the distance, so why did they still insist on seeking slowness? The paramount sage, Buddha, and the Tao ancestor had shaped the worlds as they were, so what had they seen to make them act as such? Why did they insist on having the three worlds slow down? When traveling through the Yellow Court Nation with Cui Dongshan for the first time, Cui Dongshan had once practiced fist techniques together with Chan Ping'an atop a mountain peak. At the time he had chuckled and said that as the wheels of history rolled forward, it was inevitable that many plants and flowers would be crushed and destroyed. These weren't emotionless words spoken by a ruler, and they were instead the sad lamentations of a knowledgeable Confucian scholar from the Middle Earth divine continent. The scholar had hoped that upon seeing or hearing these words, rulers or the powerful figures who were present in the horse-drawn carriage with him could lower their heads to glance at the pulverized plants and flowers. If the world was slowly becoming better, then would there be a need to worry? As long as the direction was correct and the world was becoming better, then it wouldn't matter regardless of how slowly things were progressing. There would naturally be no need to worry. If the world was becoming worse, however, for example with the wheels of history thundering forward with force and vigor and brutally crushing countless plants and flowers in its path, then it might be impossible to see the victims clearly even if one lowered their head to look. That being the case, how could the situation possibly be remedied? Perhaps this was the reason why the worlds needed to slow down. After all, if the worlds traveled slowly, then they would only be making mistakes slowly even if they ventured onto the incorrect path of the Great Tao. If that were the case, then perhaps there would be an opportunity to rectify the mistakes. Or perhaps the worlds could suffer fewer hardships. Chan Ping'an slowly paced back and forth along the railing, turning around when he reached one end and making his way back. He did this again and again, walking many laps along the railing. At this moment, Chan Ping'an was unaware of what was happening in the depths of his heart, a place that he was completely oblivious to. Each deep thought that he had was like a seed being sown in his heart. These seeds would sprout, yet many of them might wilt before they could grow and mature. However, some of them might one day flourish and bear fruit. There was something that Chan Ping'an was even more unaware of. He had carefully inscribed many characters on his bamboo slips, and he would ruminate over these characters again and again. In fact, when the sun was blazing, he would even instruct Pei Qian to bask some of the bamboo slips that recorded the phrases that he sincerely agreed with and viewed as extremely beautiful. Regardless of whether these phrases were good or bad, and no matter whether they were correct or incorrect, they would all scatter their seeds in his mind. Chan Ping'an wasn't an exception, and in reality, everyone in the world experienced the same thing. However, not everyone would use carving knives and bamboo slips to embody the processes taking place in their minds. All kinds of experiences could scatter seeds in one's mind: the grumbling of one's parents, the teachings of one's master, a phrase that one skimmed past yet returned to, a saying that one had heard many times yet suddenly comprehended one day, the green mountains and limpid waters that one had seen, the romantic encounters that one had let slip, the friends that had grown adrift, and so on and so forth. All of these experiences left behind seeds that were waiting to sprout and flower. Even until now, Chan Ping'an was still unaware of his peculiar state. He simply treated this as an act of strolling along the railing to relax his mind. A human body could be viewed as a small world, and inside the water palace that held the water seal, the tiny green-robed children all stopped what they were doing, holding their breaths and gathering their attention. Meanwhile, in the acupoint that contained the golden scholarly core, the fiery dragon formed from true qi was sound asleep outside the acupoint, while the golden aura of the miniature scholar in Confucian robes was becoming increasingly condensed. The miniature scholar had several small golden books hanging by its waist, and the dazzling Golden radiance around him made him appear much like a gold statue formed by a deity. Even though the miniature scholar was bathed in golden light, specks of golden radiance continued to float away from him and disperse in the air, making it clear that his aura was not yet stable. He was filled with eager expectation, eager for the moment that Qian Pingyan finally stopped his pacing along the railing. However, Qian Pingyan continued to slowly pace back and forth. After leaving Mountain Cliff Academy, Qian Pingyan had asked Julien and Shiro a question as they traveled. If killing an innocent person could save the lives of 10 people, would they kill the innocent person? Both Julien and Shiro had shaken their heads in reply. Qian Pingyan had then continued to increase the stakes, changing the 10 people into 1,000 people and then 10,000 people. Shiro had started to hesitate. However, Julien had frankly revealed that he wouldn't kill the innocent person, even if it meant saving the entire world. Qian Pingyan asked him why not. Julien had smiled and replied, "I'm worried that I'll be the innocent person being killed." Julien had then posed the same question back to Qian Pingyan. Qian Pingyan had responded that he couldn't answer the question either unless he was genuinely faced with such a dilemma. Only then would he know his true nature and sincere choice. The miniature golden scholar inside his acupoint started to become a little restless, wanting to charge out of the acupoint and dash out of Qian Pingyan's body several times. It wanted to reward Qian Pingyan with several forceful smacks to the head and shout, "Your thoughts are going astray. Why are you mulling over these profoundly difficult questions that you'll most definitely fail to answer right now? Stop wasting your time, and don't let slip this 1-in-1,000-year opportunity." Your train of thought just then was correct. Hurry up and return to that fundamentally important concept of slowness, the concept that's been severely neglected by the mortal worlds. Think deeper and think further. Once you understand this concept and truly comprehend it, then that will be the Dao attainment catalyst that helps you advance to the upper 5 tiers in the future. However, he couldn't directly reveal these secrets to Qian Pingyan. Otherwise, Qian Pingyan would descend into a dreadful mental state rather than gaining any benefits. Qian Pingyan finally stood still on the railing. The miniature golden scholar and the tiny green-robed children in the 2 acupoints were all filled with eager anticipation. The tiny green-robed children then exchanged surprised glances with each other before suddenly bursting into loud laughter. As it turned out, Qian Pingyan's first and purest thought after standing still pertained to a young woman. Moreover, his thoughts were very impure and unbecoming of gentlemen. He was surprisingly thinking about his next reunion with Ning Yao at the Sword Qi Great Wall. At that time he couldn't settle with just holding her hands. No, he needed to be bolder. If Ning Yao were unwilling, then the worst that could happen was being beaten up and scolded. However, he was confident that they would still remain a couple. On the other hand, what if Ning Yao were actually willing? What if she was waiting for him to take the initiative? He was a man, so how could he be so timid and hesitant? Would that make any sense? Qian Pingyan jumped off the railing, feeling slightly sleepy. As he walked back to his room, he punched his palm and pumped himself up, saying, "That won't make sense, that definitely won't make any sense. In any case, it's not like I haven't hugged Ning Yao when I was at Stalactite Mountain. However, I was too excited and dazed at the time, so I completely forgot what it felt like. No, I can't accept this at all. Perhaps I can kiss her? No, are you seeking death, Qian Pingyan? I can't think about this, it's still too soon. Wasn't I thinking about the concept of slow just then? I need to take things slow and steady with Ning Yao. In any case, slow and steady is also good. Good my ass." The tiny green-robed children clutched their bellies and roared with laughter. In fact, many of them were rolling on the floor and laughing their asses off. Of course, it wasn't the case that they could read all of Qian Pingyan's thoughts. However, tonight was an exception, especially since Qian Pingyan's thoughts were so deeply intertwined with his mental state. His thoughts were already pertaining to fundamental matters, and the profound nature of them caused his soul to react significantly and almost envelop the entire small world inside his body. The miniature golden scholar was cloaked in a rich golden aura, so dense that a golden core almost formed in his chest. He leaned back and allowed himself to fall down, and he couldn't help but curse, "Qian Pingyan, you bloody little thing." However, he started to laugh loudly after spitting out the curse. Even though the blooming flowers and fruits tonight weren't exactly perfect, far from perfect in fact, they were already hugely beneficial to him and Qian Pingyan. Take, for example, the budding golden core in the miniature golden scholar's chest. When helping Chen Ping'an refine Shen Wen's golden scholarly core back then, Mao Xiaodong's biggest hope had been for the miniature golden scholar to form a golden core. Lady Xiao Luan and her personal maidservant were staying together in a courtyard located in a remote corner of the Purple Sun residence. If they had been asked to stay together with Sun Dengxian and the others, then even someone as amicable as Lady Xiao Luan would have flared up in rage. Lady Xiao Luan was standing in the main hall right now, while her maidservant had already been rendered unconscious by a secret technique. Sitting in front of her was the culprit. The seated person shot a sideways glance at the river goddess of the White Swan River, a strange smile on their face as they looked at her tight-fitting clothes. There was an awkward expression on Lady Xiao Luan's face. The person sitting in front of her was none other than the cave spirit True Lord Wu Yi, the true owner of the Purple Sun residence. Lady Xiao Luan naturally wouldn't dare to enter the Purple Qi Palace without permission regardless of how bold and courageous she was. Moreover, she naturally wouldn't dare to dress like a high-class brothel worker and head over to knock on Chen Ping'an's door. She had done all of this at Wu Yi's behest. Wu Yi hadn't threatened Lady Xiao Luan using her superior cultivation base, and she had instead offered the river goddess an irresistible deal. Sect Master Huang Chu had already promised Lady Xiao Luan that he would help her stop the sneaky and sinister actions of the Imperial River's river god. In exchange, the river goddess residents of the White Swan River needed to offer a huge sum of immortal coins to the Purple Sun residents every 10 years. From this point onward, the White Swan River would become the same as the Iron Plate River in the sense that it was now a subordinate force of the Purple Sun residents. However, the White Swan River wasn't simply offering money to avert imminent disaster. After subordinating itself to the Purple Sun residents, the river goddess residents would undoubtedly grow further and further from the Yellow Court Nation's Imperial Han clan, eventually having to draw a clear boundary between the two. However, Sect Master Huang Chu had promised Lady Xiao Luan that the White Swan River would grow from less than 450 kilometers in length to more than 600 kilometers in length within 100 years. The White Swan River would have to finance this expansion, but the pushback from the Imperial Court of the Yellow Court Nation as well as the desperate counterattacks by the mountain and river deities would all be dealt with by the Purple Sun residents. The White Swan River simply needed to pay the market rate to enlist the help of cultivators from the Purple Sun residents, allowing them to suppress and kill their foes. Immortal money was easy to earn, while the length of the White Swan River determined the fortune that the river would enjoy. Not only did the White Swan River require permission from the Imperial Court to expand further, but it would definitely face many significant roadblocks from other forces in the process. Moreover, these roadblocks required more than just money to solve. After the White Swan River was extended to 600 kilometers in length, it would gain not just the extra waterways, but also the prefectural cities, county cities, mountains, and branching waterways in the surroundings. All of these would fall under the river goddess residence's control. At that time, the annual income of the residents would become extremely impressive. This was something that Lady Xiao Luan had always dreamed of achieving. After 100, perhaps her river could soar past the Cold Food River and become the largest river in the Yellow Court Nation, to say nothing of surpassing the Imperial River and becoming the second largest river in the nation. In fact, she even dared to dream about her residence becoming a water goddess palace in the future. This was the true reason why Lady Xiao Luan had acted so subserviently in the vast snow hall. She definitely had to grab this opportunity with both hands. This was already more than finding peace and calm with a little forbearance. Indeed, this was laying down a smooth sailing path along her great Tao, and being able to enjoy abundant incense offerings in the future. After the banquet, Wu Yi had visited Lady Xiao Luan and proposed a second transaction. Lady Xiao Luan had already been filled with hope and yearning for the future, so after weighing up the benefits and hesitating for a while, she had suppressed the vexation, grief, indignance, and shame in her heart and ultimately decided to nod in agreement. Wu Yi said that as long as Lady Xiao Luan was willing to climb into Chen Ping'an's bed and have a one-night stand with him, then that would be doing a great service to her and the Purple Sun residents. Once Lady Xiao Luan successfully completed this task, Wu Yi promised that the Iron Plate River would become a subordinate force of the White Swan River, meaning that the incense temple would no longer be able to borrow the Purple Sun residence's power to threaten her. The elderly river god would no longer be able to rival her superior force. Moreover, Wu Yi would also put in some good words for Lady Xiaoluan and the White Swan River in the imperial court of the Great Li Empire. As for whether she could obtain a peace and safety tablet, Wu Yi couldn't pat her chest and guarantee anything. At the very least, however, she would personally attend to this matter. RB. And thus, Lady Xiaoluan had made a surprise midnight visit to Changping'an. In fact, even the small drizzle had been summoned by Wu Yi's mystical power, and it was an illusion technique applied to the Purple Sun residents to prove to Changping'an that Lady Xiaoluan did indeed have romantic feelings toward him. Lady Xiaoluan had sincere feelings for him, and she was voluntarily offering her body to him after experiencing love at first sight. As such, why not enjoy a one-night stand with no strings attached? Of course, there were additional implications to this matter, and Wu Yi hadn't been lying when purposely mentioning Changping'an's bad karma as a result of killing flood dragons or their kin. She had indeed noticed the existence of bad karma on Changping'an's body. How could this be resolved? This could naturally be resolved using the incense essence and merit contained within the river goddess body. This would bring harm to Lady Xiaoluan, but Wu Yi had directly said that she would compensate the river goddess using immortal coins. Lady Xiaoluan had thought about it for a moment before nodding in agreement again. However, it was a shame that Lady Xiaoluan had returned without success. Changping'an had shut the door in her face. Xiaoluan, there was such a huge fated opportunity lying in front of you, yet you still failed to grab it with both hands. You're truly useless, Wu Yi said slowly. There was a wry smile on Lady Xiaoluan's face. Perhaps Changping'an is uninterested in women like you? Wu Yi suddenly asked. Your maidservant looks quite young, and her looks are also passable, so why doesn't she have a go? Lady Xiaoluan shook her head and replied. She most likely won't even be able to enter True Lord's Purple Chi Palace. That person called Julian is a far-roaming tier martial artist, and he pestered me for a long time following my visit. He appeared frivolous, yet he actually developed killing intent toward me at the end. Julian purposely didn't conceal this either. As such, my maidservant might be directly killed outside the Purple Chi Palace if she dares to go. Either her corpse will be tossed in front of the Purple Chi Palace, or it might be directly thrown into the Iron Plate River and allowed to flow downstream, coincidentally entering my White Swan River. Wu Yi rubbed her glabella and mumbled. Just what is that Changping'an thinking? There was a look of helplessness on Lady Xiaoluan's face. Changping'an had directly slammed the door shut in her face without saying a single word. So had she not felt intense shame and anger as well? Wu Yi looked Lady Xiaoluan up and down and said, Xiaoluan, your beauty can already be regarded as top-notch in the Yellow Court Nation, right? If that's the case, then where else can I find a woman who's equally as beautiful? Mortal women outside the mountains might appear beautiful on the surface, but in reality, which one of them isn't filled with a foul stench? Xiaoluan, perhaps Changping'an isn't fond of slender and shapely women like you? Perhaps he only likes small and petite women or tall and slender women. Lady Xiaoluan shook her head in response. She genuinely had no clue. Wu Yi sighed and said, Then tell me, is Changping'an a normal man? He probably is, Lady Xiaoluan replied in a quiet voice. Then what do you think about me? Wu Yi asked with a serious expression. A cold chill shot down Lady Xiaoluan's spine. From Changping'an to his subordinate, Zhu Lian, and then to this old ancestor of the Purple Sun residents, all of them were incomprehensible lunatics. She had no option but to choose her words carefully as she cautiously praised. Just how esteemed is True Lord's position? How can True Lord possibly sully herself? Wu Yi waved a hand and said in a disheartened voice, Forget about it. After all, we can't have you forcefully barge into the Purple Chi Palace and bet Changping'an against his will. Wu Yi stood up and continued. However, my offer to you still stands even if you failed tonight. It will stand for the next few days so you still have an opportunity to turn things around. Make of this what you will, Xiaoluan. All of a sudden, first Wu Yi and then Xiaoluan, both of their expressions became extremely solemn. They both detected a unique aura of the great Tao. It was lofty, ethereal, dignified, and vast. It was indescribably mystical and mysterious. Both of them noticed some clues. Xiaoluan, what do you say? Wu Yi asked with a stern expression. Xiaoluan's heart churned with emotions, and she no longer displayed any hesitation, and was instead filled with soaring fighting spirit. The answer inside the water goddess heart was already firm and unwavering. Compared to her chance encounter with the former emperor of the Yellow Court nation on the banks of the White Swan River, Lady Xiaoluan was feeling even more fervent and spirited at this moment. Wu Yi strode away and took her leave. Lady Xiaoluan returned to her room to rest, yet she tossed back and forth on her bed, unable to fall asleep no matter what. Another bout of rain fell on the Purple Sun residence tonight. Zhu Lian stood under the corridor eaves on the second floor of the Purple Qi Palace and remarked with a strange smile, "Alrighty then, so you're hitting us with a real one now." Chen Ping'an was completely oblivious to the interactions between Wu Yi and Lady Xiaoluan. He returned to his room, and the lamp on his desk was still burning bright. Chen Ping'an started to read again, and after reading for a while, he borrowed the now dim yellow light of the lamp to look up and around at his surroundings. The book said that the hearts of some people were like a demon-exposing mirror. A mirror that would completely expose the demons, ghosts, and fiends in the surroundings. However, Chen Ping'an hoped that his heart was simply an oil lamp. When placed on the table of his bare ancestral residence in Clayvase Alley, he hoped that it would be bright enough to illuminate the dust and moths, his companions for many years. If there were guests at his house, he hoped that the oil lamp would be bright enough to illuminate the mud brick windowsill as well as the crude ceramic pot that he had placed on top of it, inside of which were some swaying blades of grass. Chen Ping'an lay down on the table. He rested his chin on the back of his hands as he gazed at the glowing flame. In reality, he was aware that there was a matter waiting for him to face and resolve. Chen Ping'an had thought of many possibilities, and he felt like he wasn't afraid of any of them. However, there was one person and one matter that Chen Ping'an didn't dare to think about. The notions of right and wrong didn't differentiate between relatives, friends, and strangers. This was something that Chen Ping'an had said himself. Pei Qian suddenly woke up with a start and sat up. It was as if she had been woken up by a bad dream. She thought for a moment, yet she had already forgotten the contents of her nightmare. She wiped the sweat from her forehead in slight confusion, after which she looked for a talisman and slapped it onto her forehead. She then climbed into bed and went back to sleep. Pei Qian could see through people's hearts, and she could see the scenery inside the mind's realm of a person. For example, old cook Zhu Lian's mind was filled with sanguine wind and blood rain, less for a towering building. On the other hand, Cui Dongshan's mind was like a deep pond, and on the banks were some scattered golden books. There was a big secret hidden in the depths of Pei Qian's heart, one that she hadn't even told her master, Chen Ping'an. If she focused her attention when looking at Chen Ping'an, it would feel as if she were standing inside a small well. Looking up, it appeared as if there were a lamp placed above the well. There was a small ball of light that should have made her, a scaredy cat who was afraid of the dark, feel a sense of warmth and yearning. However, it would instead make her eyes burn with pain and cause tears to run down her cheeks, just like when she had looked up at the blazing sun in the lotus flower-blessed land. Even so, she would never learn her lesson, just like she had never learned her lesson in the lotus flower-blessed land. After the pain subsided, she couldn't help but look up at the light again. When she looked down, what she saw was a rippling moon at the bottom of the well. Lurking further below it, there was the dark shadow of a flood dragon that should have appeared terrifying, yet instead made her feel a sense of intimacy. Water was slowly creeping up the wall of the well inside her master's mind. Someday in the future, perhaps the bright moon in the water would meet with the ball of light above the well. Pei Qian was fast asleep, yet she subconsciously raised her hand and placed it on her chest. This was where she hid the small pouch given to her by Cui Dongshan. Cui Dongshan had said that if her master became broken-hearted or very angry one day, she could retrieve this pouch and hand it to him. Chen Ping'an remained awake the entire night. He made a spontaneous decision that he wouldn't stay at the Purple Sun residence any longer, and would instead leave and continue his journey back to the Dragon Spring Prefecture. After making up his mind, he asked Zhu Lian to notify the steward, and this could be regarded as his notice to Wu Yi. Unexpectedly, however, Sect Master Huang Chu hurriedly rushed over and did everything in his power to dissuade Chen Ping'an from leaving, saying that he could essentially resign from his position as Sect Master if Chen Ping'an genuinely left just. He strongly encouraged Chen Ping'an to stay for 1 or 2 more days no matter what, and he would organize someone to take him on a sightseeing tour around the Purple Qi Palace. At the same time, he also told Chen Ping'an another piece of news, saying that their old ancestor had already left to visit the Cold Food River. Before leaving, however, she had announced that Qian Ping'an and the others could each pick a single treasure from any of the first 4 floors of the Purple Qi Palace before they departed. This was the Purple Sun Residence's gift to its esteemed guests. Of course, Qian Ping'an could naturally turn down this offer. If he did, then Sect Master Huang Chu said that he would pick the 4 most valuable items from the Purple Qi Palace and smash them into pieces in front of Qian Ping'an. Qian Ping'an became increasingly puzzled about Wu Yi's intentions and motives. After all, this kind of forced and shameless hospitality was far too abnormal. Wu Yi was completely dumbfounded. Lady Xiaoluan felt slightly uneasy as she continued. Qian Ping'an spoke the second sentence in a very serious manner, and he said, "I'll kill you with a single punch if you continue to pester me." Wu Yi raised her hands and massaged her temples. Lady Xiaoluan covered her mouth and laughed in a silvery voice, putting her grace and charm on full display. She then put on a slightly more serious expression before patting her chest and saying in a soft voice, "I was genuinely scared because I knew he wasn't joking. Even so, I feel slightly reluctant to admit defeat. In any case, I'm aware that I've let slip a profound fated opportunity." Lady Xiaoluan respectfully bowed and apologized to Wu Yi. Wu Yi shot a sideways glance at Lady Xiaoluan and commented, "At least you know the limits of your own abilities." Lady Xiaoluan faltered upon hearing this, yet she quickly came to her senses and stole a glance at the tall yet slightly skinny Wu Yi. She then hurriedly retracted her gaze, feeling a little embarrassed. "Qian Ping'an is blind as a bat." Wu Yi spat in anger. Julien continued to chuckle in secret, as he accompanied Qian Ping'an to the corridor located on the 4th floor of the Purple Qi Palace. In the end, he couldn't help but laugh out loud and ask, "Young master, what are your thoughts about coming across such a mysterious romantic encounter? The cultivation world is truly filled with perilous dangers." Qian Ping'an replied with a dark expression. Dawn arrived, and Qian Ping'an and the others finished packing their luggage and prepared to leave the Purple Sun residence. Sect Master Huang Chu and 2 elderly Dragon Gate tier immortals personally saw them off, accompanying them all the way to the bank of the Iron Plate River. The river god of the incense temple had already prepared an immortal ship for them, and they needed to travel downstream for 50 or so kilometers before disembarking at a ferry station and continuing their journey to the border of the Yellow Court Nation. Qian Ping'an expressed his gratitude to Huang Chu, after which Huang Chu retrieved a newly crafted sandalwood box, one that adopted the style of renowned study room antiques in the Yellow Court Nation, saying that it was a small gift from the old ancestor. Pei Qian had a stern expression, pretending that she didn't care about this at all. Qian Ping'an hesitated for a moment before eventually deciding to accept the small box that contained 4 valuable treasures from the Purple Qi Palace, saying, "Sect Master Huang Chu, you definitely need to visit Downtrodden Mountain if you go to the Dragon Spring Prefecture in the future." Afterward, Qian Ping'an raised the box of valuables and joked, "I won't have any valuable gifts for you, nor will I have old flood dragon yearning wine like those served in the banquet at the vast snow hall. I'll only have some home-style cooking to offer you. Perhaps Sect Master Huang Chu won't want to say hi to me even if he visits the Dragon Spring Prefecture." Huang Chu smiled faintly and replied, "If I have the opportunity to visit the Great Li Empire, I'll definitely find a chance to visit young Master Qian even if I don't visit the Dragon Spring Prefecture." They happily chatted with each other, and Huang Chu accompanied Qian Ping'an and the others all the way to the immortal ship docked at the bank. Huang Chu initially wanted to board the immortal ship and accompany them all the way to the ferry station, yet Qian Ping'an insisted again and again that this wouldn't be necessary. Only then did Huang Chu give up on the matter. Qian Ping'an walked to the bow of the immortal ship after boarding, and the sword-nurturing gourd by his waist was filled with old flood dragon yearning wine as the ship slowly sailed downstream. This was a wine brimming with spiritual energy. Qian Ping'an cupped his fists in the direction of the Purple Qi Palace. She was in a fairly good mood. Wu Yi had already recorded the events of the past 2 days, no matter how major or minor the event, and reported them to her father by sending a flying sword to the Dragon Spring Prefecture's Cloud Drape Mountain. She believed that even if she wasn't praised and rewarded, she would at least be able to escape criticism and punishment. The immortal ship slowly sailed away, becoming as small as a speck of sand in Wu Yi's eyes. However, her body suddenly tensed up at this moment, and she didn't dare to move a single muscle. At some unknown time, a refined elder in Confucian robes had already materialized beside her, easily breaking through the defensive formations of the Purple Sun residence to silently arrive at the top floor of the Purple Qi Palace. Wu Yi composed herself and said in a quiet voice, "This unfilial daughter greets her father." As it turned out, the uninvited guest was none other than the former Assistant Minister of the Yellow Court Nation's Ministry of Revenue, and the current Deputy Mountain Master of Cloud Drape Mountain's Forest Deer Academy. This elderly flood dragon had adopted countless pseudonyms and identities during his extremely long life. The old man glanced at Wu Yi and surprisingly smiled in a rare display, saying, "You managed to kill 3 birds with 1 stone. Since when did you become so smart?" OS. Wu Yi was filled with fear and unease, and she couldn't help but feel like her father was praising her in a sarcastic manner or insinuating something else. She was terrified that she would suffer his wrath in the next moment, and she was already having thoughts about fleeing. Chang Shuidong placed a hand on the railing and said slowly, "Since when did the river god of the Imperial River become powerful enough to bring harm to the White Swan River's Shaoluan?" His high-profile visit to the Dragon Spring Prefecture was merely in order to drink wine with that small snake. At the same time, the little boy in azure who's pretending to be wealthy and acting generously at his own cost managed to obtain a peace and safety tablet for his friend. He encountered many roadblocks in the process, and it was exceedingly difficult for him to obtain the tablet. In reality, Shaoluan miscalculated and became flustered all on her own, causing her to scramble for help in desperation. It was because of this that she was willing to devalue herself and submit to the Purple Sun residence. However, Shaoluan's willingness to abandon her relationship with the Imperial Han clan shows that she's a relatively smart person. She can enjoy a whole host of benefits by submitting to the Purple Sun residence, while you can also earn a huge sum of money by doing not much at all. This is a win-win situation, and this is the first of 3 benefits you managed to obtain. Chang Shuidong looked at his palms before shaking his head and clasping his hands behind his back, continuing, "Your methods of pleasing Chan Ping'an were very unrefined and unnatural, and you surprisingly even tried to show your superiority to him during the banquet in the vast snow hall. However, just like some incorrect moves in a game of Go, your incorrect actions actually ended up becoming extremely useful moves that significantly improved Chan Ping'an's impression of you. Otherwise, Chan Ping'an would have become increasingly wary and guarded if you had appeared shrewd and calculating the entire time. He would have felt fear and caution toward you in the Purple Sun residence, and in the end you would have failed to foster any good relationship with him. The most brilliant move you made was to summon a light drizzle that night, initially planning to use it as a disguise for Shaoluan, and creating the illusion that she had developed romantic feelings for Chan Ping'an. However, you unexpectedly managed to give Chan Ping'an a huge fated opportunity because of this. If it weren't for me deliberately suppressing the phenomenon of heaven and earth, I'm afraid that it would have ended up far bigger than what it was. Not only would the Purple Sun residents have noticed it, but all of the spirits and deities in the Iron Plate River, and even the White Swan River would have noticed it as well. Sages enjoy the mountains but have a stronger affinity with water. There are profound principles behind this saying. So your actions greatly surprised me. They were surprisingly delightful. This is the second of the 3 benefits. The old man turned around and said with a smile, "And finally, it was the Imperial Preceptor's plan to have you invite Chan Ping'an to the Purple Sun residence. Imperial Preceptor Cui Chan frankly revealed to me that he hoped to slow down Chan Ping'an's return to his hometown. As for the Imperial Preceptor's intentions, he definitely wouldn't reveal them to an outsider like me. Of course, I don't want to know about his reasons or meddle in his affairs anyway. After all, becoming overly involved in these matters will only lead to negative outcomes for me regardless of whether the Imperial Preceptor succeeds or fails. You helped me complete this task this time, which essentially means that I provided some minor help to the Imperial Preceptor. Because of this, the Purple Sun residents will definitely receive rewards from the Great Li Empire. Just wait for the good news." This was indeed brilliant news, yet Wu Yi couldn't help but feel a cold chill shoot through her body. She never imagined that her father had actually observed this farcical matter from the beginning to the end. Standing in the corridor on the top floor of the Purple Qi Palace and facing her father, Wu Yi was most likely feeling the same emotions that Lady Shaoluan had felt when facing her in the small courtyard. Chang Shuidong not only looked like a Confucian scholar, but he was also dressed like one. He looked at his palms again, furrowing his brows and murmuring, "And just what can we determine from this? Wu stole a secret glance. What she saw was her father using a mystical power to summon the water essence contained within the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, causing beads of water to fill his palms. It was as if he had collected these beads of water from some lotus leaves following a period of rainfall. However, these beads of water suddenly exploded in unison, transforming into a puddle of rainwater in her father's palm. Chang Shuidong observed the puddle of water for a long time, yet he was still unable to make heads or tails of the situation. Before long, the puddle of water transformed into beads of rainwater again. In Wu Yi's mind, her father's knowledge could rival that of Confucian sages from the academies. Yet, he appeared slightly hesitant at this moment, and he extended his other hand and poured the beads of rainwater over, causing a golden light to instantly flash in his palm. Before Wu Yi could focus her gaze and see anything, her father had already rapidly clenched his hand into a fist, completely obscuring her view. Chang Shuidong pondered for a moment before coming to his senses and saying to Wu Yi with a smile, "There's nothing interesting to look at." Wu Yi naturally didn't dare to dig any deeper. "Do you know why all of the sentient beings in the world strive so hard to achieve human form?" the old man asked. "The human body is clearly so weak, needing to ingest food and liquid for the sake of survival. This is also an obstruction to cultivation. Hence the reason why qi refiners talk about abstaining from food to prevent the stench from detrimentally affecting their mind, soul, and qi. In fact, the act of eating and drinking prevents one from reverting their old age and returning to a nascent stage. On the other hand, flood dragons like us are uniquely blessed by the heavens, possessing not only a powerful physique, but also possessing intelligence that can rival the humans. That being the case, why are we standing here in human form?" Wu Yi was slightly confused, so she didn't dare to say anything in response. This pertained to the acupoints of humans, and it pertained to the small world and blessed land that a human body represented. This was common knowledge to all cultivators in the mountains and all spirits and ghosts in the mountains. However, her father definitely wouldn't speak nonsense to her, so what was the profound meaning behind his statement? Chang Shuidong didn't make things too difficult for Wu Yi, one of his few remaining children in the world, and he revealed, "The profound meaning is contained within a single word: returning." He raised a finger and drew a circle in the air. Wu Yi fell deep into thought. Chang Shuidong smiled and said, "You're still young, and your experience in this world is still lacking. To say nothing of the situation 3,000 years ago, where would you go to seek an answer about the situation 10,000 years ago if I don't give you the answer?" Wu Yi's expression immediately became solemn. She knew that her father was giving her a Tao attainment catalyst. She had already been stuck at the golden core tier for 300 or so years, and the heretical cultivation technique that could allow qi refiners to advance to the nascent tier didn't make things any easier for her. As a descendant of flood dragons, she faced many obstacles and challenges when cultivating this technique. She had finally advanced to the peak stage of the golden core tier after much struggle, yet she had remained at this level for more than 100 years, unable to break through to the next tier no matter what she did. This caused her to feel a sense of despair. Chang Shuidong looked up at the sky and asked, "Are you not curious about where all of the mortal humans belonging to the three teachings, the 100 schools of thought, and the three worlds have come from? Why did they come here? And how did they ultimately manage to become the owners of the world?" There are many nonsensical rumors regarding the last question, with some of them completely wrong and some of them containing many truths. Perhaps you've gained a rough understanding of some secrets as well. Wu Yi nodded in response. 3,000 years ago, the last true dragon in the world had fled from the Middle-earth divine continent and relied on its innate mystical powers, powers that allowed it to control the water fortune of the world, to escape to the southernmost region of the eastern treasured vile continent. It had climbed ashore at Old Dragon City, yet its severe wounds meant that it was forced to crash into the ground and forcefully carve out a deep dragon channel. Afterward, a powerful cultivator had used a vanquishing technique, one that was already long lost nowadays, to suppress the true dragon, forcing it to come out from underground. In the end, the true dragon that was already on the verge of death had collapsed and died near the region where the Jewel Small World would later be formed. Following its death, another powerful cultivator had used a mystical ability to forge the Jewel Small World, making it appear like a bright jewel that hung high above the Greatly Empire. Chang Shuidong sighed and lamented. Your comprehension ability is truly pathetic. Wu Yi felt slightly aggrieved. Chang Shuidong waved his sleeve, causing the Purple Sun residence to temporarily transform into a small world. He then retrieved the small immortal boat that he had used to travel to the starry sky in the past, and he stepped onto the wooden boat before gesturing for Wu Yi to follow him aboard. Only then did he ask, "Who do you think is the strongest being to have existed in the world?" "The founders of the three teachings?" Wu Yi replied in a timid and uncertain voice. "And those powerful 14th-tier cultivators who are unwilling to show themselves in the world? The former group of people are as omnipotent as the heavens if they stay inside their territories, while the latter group of people have already transcended from the notion of cultivation basis. They also possess incomprehensible mystical powers." Chang Shuidong didn't comment on his daughter's answer, and he casually pointed at the Iron Plate River and said with a smile, "There's the incense temple, and located slightly further than that is the river goddess temple of the White Swan River. Even further than that is the residence of your brother, the river god of the Cold Food River. Several other mountain god shrines and river god shrines are also located in the surrounding areas. What is the common point between all of them? Forget about it, I'll just tell you the answer straight away. Otherwise, you're purely wasting my spiritual energy by making me wait for your slow brain to turn and come up with an answer. The common point is that mortal people in the world all expect deities to form a gold statue if they have a shrine dedicated to them. Regardless of how poor a deity's cultivation aptitude was in the past, they would all gain a gold statue after having a dedicated shrine built for them. In other words, they can ascend to the heavens in a single step. That being the case, will they still need to cultivate afterward? They can simply enjoy incense offerings, becoming more powerful as they receive more offerings. At the same time, their godly body will also decay at a slower rate. This is a separate great Tao from the cultivation of qi refiners, and it's because of this that it's often said that gods and immortals walk two different paths. And now looking back at that word returning, do you understand it now? Wu Yi shook her head and replied, "I still don't understand." Chang Shuidong sighed with emotion and remarked, "If you suddenly disappear without a trace one day, it will definitely be because you died from stupidity. Do you know? In order to advance to the nascent tier, your younger brother was much harder on himself compared to you. He abandoned many innate mystical powers of flood dragons, and directly chose to become a river god that faces many barriers and restrictions." Wu Yi's eyes lit up and she asked, "We need to become deities if we want to return to the nascent form? You're focused on cultivating heretical techniques, and you're using an outside power to polish your own cultivation. This is also a correct path, but you're still yet to find the correct method and you're still yet to travel far enough. Even so, there's at least a sliver of a chance for you to succeed." The old man tapped the railing with his finger and continued, "What you're looking for doesn't exist at the two extremes. Instead, it's located here, right between humans and deities. This is the fundamental great Tao that has the strongest affinity with flood dragons and their kin. Indeed, this was the path adopted by our ancestors 10,000 years ago. Back then, flood dragons ruled over the lakes and seas, rivers and streams, and everywhere else that contained water. However, your younger brother was brought down by his own smarts, mistakenly believing that the appointment of formal gods in ancient times was much the same as the appointment of formal gods by the imperial courts in the current age. He embarked on this incorrect path, committing a grave mistake that has no cure. In any case, the rules of heaven and earth have now changed, and this is something that affects us significantly. Because of the bloody event that took place all those years ago, we're now detested by the great Tao and face immense difficulties when trying to advance to the nascent tier." Wu Yi finally couldn't hold back anymore, saying, "Father, you still haven't told me how I can advance to the nascent tier. Just tell it to me straight." Chang Shuidong smiled and asked, "You and I are father and daughter, so do you feel like it's only right for me to guide you on the path of cultivation?" Wu Yi instantly felt as if she were facing a formidable enemy. She felt like she was in for a hard time. Sure enough, Chang Shuidong chuckled coldly and said, "The concept of benevolent parents and filial children is one taught to you by the Confucian sect. It isn't something that I taught you. I've never wished for my descendants to be respectful and benevolent, and you should be more aware of this fact than your siblings in my belly, right? With that in mind, how should you conduct yourself as my daughter?" Wu Yi's face was as pale as a sheet. Chang Shuidong cracked a grin, revealing his snow-white teeth as he continued. I'll devour you if you fail to advance to the nascent tier in the next 100 years. Otherwise, you'll be leeching away my flood dragon fortune for nothing. Since you performed well this time, let me tell you another piece of news. Chen Ping'an possesses some snake gall pebbles formed from the blood essence of the final true dragon, with several of the pebbles being of exceptional quality. You won't be able to directly advance to the nascent tier if you ingest them, but you'll at least be able to improve your combat power and struggle for a while longer when the day comes for me to devour you. What do you say? Aren't I a very loving and benevolent father? Ernie. The tall and slender Wu Yi trembled in fear. Chang Shuidong suddenly sighed with emotion and remarked, You eat water spirits to fill your belly, while I eat my descendants to gather flood dragon fortune. Following this pattern, Cui Dongshan, who possesses an ancient immortal body, can naturally eat me as well. What should I do? He smiled at Wu Yi and said, So don't feel like you're oh so powerful and mighty just because your cultivation base is a bit higher than other people. There is always a taller mountain, and there is always a stronger person. In this sense, we need to thank the Confucian sages for establishing the rules of this world. Otherwise, you and your younger brother would have already become my meal and ceased to exist long ago. And soon afterward, I would most likely have been suppressed and controlled by Cui Dongshan as well. Looking at the current world, it might seem like the mortal nations are perpetually at war. The immortal forces are engaged in endless arguments and conflicts, and the 100 schools of thought are also scheming and plotting against each other. However, does this have the right to be referred to as a turbulent age? Haha. I wonder what will happen if the scenes from 10,000 years ago reappear again today. Will everyone rush to the Confucian temples in the states, provinces, and prefectures to kneel down and kowtow? Wu Yi had no thoughts or feelings about these significant matters. Indeed, she was still engrossed in the thought of becoming a nascent tier cultivator. Which 4 items did you give Chen Ping'an? Chang Shuidong asked. I picked 1 item from each of the first 4 floors, Wu Yi replied honestly. There was a piece of arrowsiderite that condensed and formed during the first blast of spring thunder and landed in the mortal world. Measuring the size of a thumb and weighing 3 kilograms, there was a high-grade Dao robe waved from spring grass. There were 6 Foxian beauty talismanic paper humans specially crafted by Light Breeze City's Su clan, and there was a green core filled with abundant spiritual energy that can grow into a 1,000-year-old bayberry tree in a single year after being planted. The tree will also release spiritual energy at the turn of each solar term. An old ancestor from the Spirit Charm sect offered me a huge sum of money to purchase this core. Yet I wasn't willing to part with it at the time. Your choices are not bad, Chang Shuidong said with a nod. He then suddenly smiled and added, Don't feel like you're tossing treasures into the bin. Formal God Wei Bo of the Northern Mountain will naturally explain the value of each treasure to Chen Ping'an. Of course, the prerequisite is that Chen Ping'an can make it back to Downtrodden Mountain in one piece. This will depend on the duel between Imperial Preceptor Cui Chan and Cui Dongshan. Wu Yi noticed the shocking secret revealed by her father's words. A duel between Cui Chan and Cui Dongshan? Even so, her mind was still obsessed with the concept of finding the right balance between deities and humans, so she asked with a pleading expression, Father, won't I be able to do more things for you once I advance to the nascent tier? However, Chang Shuidong had already retrieved his small boat and deactivated the small world formed by his mystical ability, after which he returned to the Greatly Empire's cloud-draped mountain in a flash. He left behind a melancholy Wu Yi who was feeling both anxious and terrified. A time frame of 100 years. This was a long lifespan that mortal humans dreamed of reaching. Yet in Wu Yi's eyes, what was a mere 100 years in the context of her long life? The river god of the incense temple was overly friendly and hospitable to Chen Ping'an and the others, so Chen Ping'an was eventually forced to use Zhu Lian as a shield. After a short while, Zhu Lian and the river god of the Iron Plate River were already referring to each other as brothers. When they arrived at the ferry station, the two people reluctantly farewelled each other, with the river god appearing extremely sincere and natural as he referred to Zhu Lian as his big brother. The river god returned to the immortal ship, and both Chen Ping'an and Zhu Lian retracted their gazes in unison. Chen Ping'an smiled and asked, "What did the two of you talk about? The two of you hit it off quite well." Zhu Lian chuckled and replied, "What else can men talk about? Women, of course. We spent half the time talking about Lady Xiaoluan. Upon hearing this, Chen Ping'an couldn't be bothered asking anything else. A look of embarrassment suddenly appeared on Julian's face as he said, "Young master, can you let me relieve these troubles for you if you come across them again in the future? I can be regarded as an experienced member of the cultivation world, and I'm least afraid of dealing with these romantic troubles. I don't dare to dream about having a romantic relationship with a deity like Lady Xiaoluan, but as long as I cast off all restrictions and use my true abilities, utilizing just a fraction of my former charisma, I can definitely woo Lady Xiaoluan's personal maidservants and those young female cultivators in the Purple Sun residence in at most 3 days." Chen Ping'an hurriedly cut Julian off, especially since Pei Qian was standing right beside them. She was still young, so she was extremely impressionable, and would remember these words far better than she could remember the principles expounded in the books. Julian was still unwilling to give up, so he asked, "Young master, people are a reflection of their environment, so your hometown in the Dragon Spring Prefecture is definitely brimming with beautiful women, right?" Chen Ping'an pondered for a moment before shaking his head and replying, "In terms of looks alone, they're no different from the women in ordinary small towns." Julian sighed and lamented, "This is a small imperfection." However, Julian quickly added, "I boldly discussed matters pertaining to Sun Dengxian with the river god without permission, and I surmise that if Sun Dengxian encounters any trouble in the Yellow Court Nation in the future, my little brother who's observant and inquisitive will perhaps be able to render some help. However, young master should also be prepared for the river god of the incense temple seeking praise and reward even if his incense temple is located tens of thousands of kilometers away." Chen Ping'an raised a thumb at Julian and praised, "You did well regarding this matter. Why does young master admire Sun Dengxian so much?" Julian asked in curiosity. "Because he's a chivalrous hero, of course. When traveling through the cultivation world, who should we admire if not chivalrous heroes? Perhaps we should worship and admire lechers and perverts." Chen Ping'an replied without hesitation, "Young master, I'm not a lecher or a pervert." Julian retorted in a serious voice, "I'm elegant and refined and—" Chen Ping'an immediately interjected and said, "Oh, you can piss off with that nonsense." Pei Qian bobbed her head back and forth, copying Chen Ping'an's tone as she poured fuel on the flames and said, "Oh, you can piss off with that nonsense." Julian pretended to raise a foot, causing Pei Qian to hurriedly scurry away in fright. Just like back then when he had returned home from the Great Sui Nation, Chen Ping'an once again didn't choose to enter the Great Li Empire via the Yefu Pass. After several years, he arrived at Wind Grace Town again, a town located on the border of the Yellow Court Nation. Arriving here meant that they were only 300 kilometers away from the Dragon Spring Prefecture. After leaving Wind Grace Town, they would need to travel along an extensive section of plank roads built upon mountain cliffs. Back then, Chen Ping'an had been accompanied by the little boy in azure and the little girl in pink. When he had stopped and lit up a campfire in the howling wind and snow, a master and subordinate had coincidentally walked past their temporary camp. The more Chen Ping'an thought about this, the more he was convinced that the gentle and carefree-looking man was actually a powerful and lofty figure. They left Wind Grace Town in the evening, and they arrived in front of the familiar plank roads again. Chen Ping'an found a wider section of the plank road, and decided to set up a temporary camp there for the night. At the same time, he also warned Pei Qian to keep a safe distance from the outer edge of the plank road when she practiced her deranged demon sword techniques. "The old cook can fly, so he can rescue me even if I accidentally slip and fall off the plank road, right?" Pei Qian asked in puzzlement. "If you want to ride on the wind, then you can directly ask Julian to help you. However, you still need to be careful when you practice your sword techniques. These are two separate matters," Chen Ping'an replied casually. Pei Qian nodded in understanding. She then brandished her hiking pole and started to strike the heavens, strike the earth, and strike all of the demons, ghosts, spirits, and fiends. Julian felt like he was going to become blind whenever he saw this. On the other hand, Shuro was quite fond of watching Pei Qian mess around, so she sat down on a rock and started to appreciate Pei Qian's sword techniques. Pei Qian trained hard and trained earnestly, and she was drenched in sweat when she finally put down her hiking pole. Afterward, she put Chen Ping'an's bamboo bookcase sideways and used it as a table, taking out her calligraphy brush and other stationery, and borrowing the last rays of evening light to squat down and transcribe texts. When she finished, Julian had finished cooking dinner as well. Pei Qian and Shiro retrieved some cutlery, while Julian took out 2 wine cups and Qian Pingyan grabbed his sword nurturing gourd and poured into the cup some old flood dragon yearning wine. Qian Pingyan and Julian would occasionally enjoy a drink. Pei Qian displayed her impressive skills and wolfed down a bowl of rice in no time. Qian Pingyan and Julian were only just starting to drink their second cups of wine when she smiled widely and asked Qian Pingyan, "Master, can I have a peek at that small sandalwood box? After all, what if the treasures inside have gone missing? The sooner we discover this, the sooner we can retrace our steps to look for them." Qian Pingyan took a sip of wine before smiling and replying, "Go ahead." Having received permission from Qian Pingyan, Pei Qian retrieved the small and exquisite sandalwood box from her master's bookcase, carrying it in her arms as she sat down cross-legged beside him. She then opened the box and looked over the items. There was the thumb-sized yet extremely heavy arrow siderite. There was a folded Dao robe that weighed less than 2 ounces, and there was a stack of talismans that had beautiful Foxian ladies illustrated on them. Pei Qian looked over the treasures again and again, seemingly afraid that they would suddenly grow legs and run away. "Master, the bayberry core has gone missing," she suddenly exclaimed in alarm. "What should we do? Oh no, what should we do? Should I retrace our steps and look for it straight away?" Julian rolled his eyes. Shiro couldn't help but smile. Could the little girl please conceal the sparkle in her eyes better when she was trying to trick other people? "Oh, is that so? Don't worry about it. Your master is rich now, so it doesn't matter that we lost it," Qian Pingyan replied indifferently. Pei Qian chuckled and flicked her wrist, spreading open her palm and asking, "Master, are you happy? We thought we lost the bayberry core just then, didn't we? But look, there's one in my hand, so that means we've actually gained an extra bayberry core now." Qian Pingyan nodded with a smile. Pei Qian laughed out loud and remarked, "Master, you're so dumb. We never lost the bayberry in the first place. Did you not notice this?" Qian Pingyan flicked Pei Qian on the forehead. Pei Qian remained unmoving, pretending to take a deep breath as she announced, "It didn't hurt at all." Julian couldn't endure this anymore, so he directly made a flicking motion at Pei Qian. Pei Qian was in so much pain that she rapidly placed the bayberry core back inside the small sandalwood box before hurriedly placing the box aside. She then clasped her forehead and burst into tears. Qian Pingyan couldn't wipe the smile from his face. Secretly looking through the gap between her fingers and seeing that her master didn't care about her well-being, Pei Qian started to cry even louder. Qian Pingyan had no option but to hurriedly wipe the smile from his face and ask, "Do you want to see Master soar through the sky on his sword?" The corners of Pei Qian's mouth drooped downward as she replied in an aggrieved voice, "No, I don't want to see it." Qian Pingyan simply smiled in response. Pei Qian suddenly smiled widely and said, "I really want to see it." Hearing this, Qian Pingyan grabbed Sword Immortal, the pseudo-celestial tool, from his back. However, he left the sword in its scabbard as he stood up and faced the cliff, following which he directly tossed the sword into the air. Qian Pingyan quickly dashed forward, patting his sword nurturing gourd as he strode into the air and stepped onto Sword Immortal, soaring away into the sky. Pei Qian's mouth was agape as she hurriedly stood up and ran over to the edge of the cliff, opening her eyes as wide as she could as she looked at the carefree figure standing on his sword and soaring through the sky. Julian and Shiro were naturally aware of Qian Pingyan's secret. In fact, both 1st and 15th were concealed under the sheathed Sword Immortal. "Master, don't fly too far away," Pei Qian yelled at the top of her lungs. Soaring through the mountain wind, Qian Pingyan bent his knees slightly as he controlled his 2 flying swords with his mind. The tip of Sword Immortal pointed upward, causing Qian Pingyan to immediately shoot upward and break through a layer of clouds. However, Qian Pingyan couldn't help but stop in his tracks as he gazed at the boundless golden clouds illuminated by the last rays of sunshine. There existed grand and indescribable beauty between heaven and earth. Only at this moment did Qian Pingyan realize that what he saw on the intercontinental ships was completely different from what he saw while riding on his sword. This was a completely different feeling. Qian Pingyan gazed at the sea of clouds for a long time, all the way until the sun dipped into the clouds and the golden radiance gradually faded. In the end, Qian Pingyan closed his eyes and focused his attention, performing standing meditation on the hovering Sword Immortal. When Qian Pingyan finished his training, he suddenly felt a tug at his heart, causing him to murmur, "Has Chao Xi broken through again?" After Chen Ping'an returned to the plank roads, Julien discovered that his young master, who had used some small tricks to soar through the sky, was radiating with a slightly different aura. This was an extremely mystical feeling. In fact, it was only after interacting with Chen Ping'an for an extended period of time that Julien could notice these kinds of subtle changes. It was like the spring breeze sending ripples through a pond. Chen Ping'an told Pei Qian, who had waited a very long time for him, to go to bed first, and he surprisingly called Julien over for a drink in a very rare display. The two of them sat cross-legged on the cliff beyond the plank road, and Julien asked with a smile, "Young master, you look quite happy? Is this because it felt very good to soar through the sky on your sword? Do you still remember Chao Xi?" Chen Ping'an asked. Julien smiled and replied, "How can I forget this name? Young master lost 3 consecutive battles against him at the Sword Qi Great Wall, and he managed to make young master accept the defeats wholeheartedly. I feel a strong urge to visit him tomorrow and smash him to death with 1 or 2 punches, lest he compete with young master for the martial fortune of the world in the future. That way he won't delay young master from reaching the martial god tier, the legendary 11th tier." Chen Ping'an paid no heed to Julien's obsequious words of praise and jokes, and he casually took a sip of wine as he replied, "I don't know whether it's a false perception or not, but it seems like Chao Xi might have broken through again. Then why is young master still feeling happy?" Julien asked in puzzlement. The title of number 1 in the world can't belong to 2 people at the same time. Of course, it's still far too early for young master and Chao Xi to consider this title. Chen Ping'an took a sip of old Flood Dragon yearning wine from his sword-nurturing gourd and asked, "Why do pure martial artists like us practice fist techniques and other martial arts techniques? In this sense, Sui Yubian, Lu Baixiang, Wei Xian and I were all the same. However, the lotus flower-blessed land was only a small place, after all, so our understanding of longevity and immortality was shallow even though we were already standing at the apex of the world. As such, we never pondered too deeply on this matter, especially since we were oblivious to the existence of a so-called higher world. In terms of seeking longevity and pursuing Tao, Wei Xian traveled the furthest relative to the rest of us. He was an emperor, so it was only natural that he aspired to achieve longevity after hearing his subjects shout, 'Long live the emperor,' all the time." Chen Ping'an pointed at himself and said, "I haven't told you much about my situation a few years ago. In the beginning, I only started to practice fist techniques because someone shattered my bridge of immortality. I needed to practice fist techniques to stay alive. But this eventually became a habit that I've maintained until today. When I fulfilled my promise and delivered the sword forged by Ruan Qiong to Ningyao at Stalactite Mountain, I had already traveled a very long distance and was about to reach my goal of throwing 1 million punches. At the time, I was naturally feeling a sense of confusion in the depths of my heart. There was already no need to practice fist techniques to stay alive, and I'm not the type of person who wants to fight others for the title of number 1 in the world either. That being the case, where should I go from there? Should I become the next Zhu He? That wouldn't be very difficult. Or should I become like the water-combing nation's Song Yushao? That wouldn't be hard either. Or should I get my head down and throw another 1 million punches, aspiring to one day obtain the impressive aura of Vajrabhati tier martial artists? It's important to note that I was at the Sword Qi Great Wall at the time, the place that contains the largest number of sword immortals in the world. A few steps from where I lived was the thatched cottage of the most experienced old great sword immortal at the Sword Qi Great Wall, and on the wall beneath me were the characters carved out by the old great sword immortal as well as Aoyang. Did I not want to switch to practicing sword techniques instead? I felt a very strong desire to switch. This is the reason why I was so desperate to rebuild my bridge of immortality back then. In fact, I even thought to myself that since it was bad to focus on too many things at once, should I abandon my fist techniques and focus all of my effort on becoming a sword cultivator instead? Should I nurture a bonded flying sword and eventually become a legitimate sword immortal? I was deeply attracted by this option, but I didn't dare to reveal these thoughts to Ningyao, afraid that she would view me as someone who wasn't dedicated to his initial goals. If I abandoned my fist techniques with such casual disregard, would I do the same to her in the future? Julien took a swig of wine and remarked, "I regret meeting young master so late. I actually missed the period of time when young master was feeling anxious, something that I might not be able to witness again in the future." I have to take a swig of wine to wash away the disappointment in my heart. Qian Ping'an looked up and held his sword-nurturing gourd in both hands, lightly patting it as he chuckled. It was at that time that I met Qiao Ci, so I'm extremely thankful to him. However, I was always too embarrassed to say this out loud. Qian Ping'an pointed at himself again before pointing at the tall mountain face opposite the plank road and continuing. Perhaps Qiao Ci is right over there, and the gulf between us is immense. Even though I'm not explicitly trying to become the strongest martial artist in the world or whatnot, I'm not a fool either. Who doesn't want to be number one? It's just that I'm willing to take things a little slower. This is similar to when I was pacing back and forth on the railing of the Purple Sun Residence's treasure storage building not long ago. I was blindly contemplating the concept of slowness, and I was able to understand many things. If I dig deeper and look for the origin, I actually came across this concept a long time ago when I was still an apprentice learning to mold pottery in the Dragon Kills. Old Man Yao said I was talentless, so he was never willing to teach me any principles and didn't even like to speak with me. However, I had treated my job in the Dragon Kills as the foundation for my life, so what could I do if Old Man Yao was unwilling to teach me anything? Thus, I always listened in when he was teaching Lu Xianying and the other apprentices, telling them that they needed to calm their minds if they wanted to stabilize their hands. Only that way could they go from slow and not wrong to quick and correct. Taking this into account, it can be said that I came across the concept of slowness a long time ago, right? Moreover, I also remembered the principle quite well, no? In reality, this isn't the case. It was only after I traveled a long distance and came across many people that many principles in my mind finally took root. As Mountain Master Mao put it, these principles finally became my own. After meeting Qiao Ci, I realized that Ma Kuxuan wasn't the only impressive person at the same age as me. There's also Qiao Ci, and I can't bring myself to detest or feel jealous of him no matter how dazzling he is. At most, I'll only feel disappointed that I lost 3 consecutive battles against someone in front of the girl whom I like. It's only natural that I feel slightly unhappy as well. Thus, I decided at that time that I would strive to win 3 consecutive battles against Qiao Ci one day, regardless of how lofty his martial arts cultivation base became in the future, and regardless of how others referred to him as an unrivaled martial arts talent. Qian Ping'an's expression was calm and relaxed, yet there was a bright glimmer in his eyes as he exclaimed, "I'll strive to defeat him using fist techniques alone." Empty Setbu. Julien slapped his thigh and praised. "Magnificent! Young master's aspiration is truly as lofty as the heavens." Qian Ping'an patted his sword-nurturing gourd and gazed at the opposite mountain face, smiling with squinted eyes as he said, "That was just some drunken ramble." Julien felt like he was the best at understanding other people and improving the atmosphere, and this was similar to how a new pot of wine should be put away and allowed to rest after the clay seal was formed. It didn't make sense to pick it up straight away and smell it. Thus Julien changed the topic and asked, "It seems like young master is worried about something?" Qian Ping'an nodded and replied, "You've also been keeping an eye on the state of the Great Li Empire. So do you not find it strange that Cui Dongshan appeared in Mountain Cliff Academy while Imperial Preceptor Cui Chan is busy scheming and casting nets in another area? The mystical powers of those at the upper 5 tiers are unfathomable, so it's not exactly strange that the Imperial Preceptor can split his soul into 2, right? In any case, we also have Shiro who's living in an immortal body," Julien replied. Qian Ping'an shook his head and explained, "Cui Chan and Cui Dongshan have already become 2 different people, and they've also started to diverge onto different paths of the Great Tao. With this in mind, how do you think 2 people with the same character and disposition will interact with each other in the future?" Julien smiled and responded, "With Cui Dongshan's temper, he definitely won't bow his head to anyone apart from young master. He won't even bow his head to himself. As someone who came up with the iridescent cloud Go manual, how will he play this game of Go with himself?" Qian Ping'an murmured. Julien furrowed his brows, with his expression becoming solemn as he turned around to look at Qian Ping'an. Qian Ping'an nodded and continued, "I suspect that I'm the Go board, and it's very likely that the 2 of them would start their game of Go once I set foot in Old Dragon City." Qian Ping'an raised a finger and drew a cross in the air, saying, "There are many crisscrossing points of interest, with the larger points of interest being places like the Azure Phoenix Nation and Mountain Cliff Academy. Meanwhile, the smaller points of interest can be places like the Lion Garden, any immortal ship that sails to the Great Sui Nation, and the Purple Sun residence that we just visited not long ago. Cui Dongshan most likely won't stoop as low as to harm young master, right? Zhu Lian asked. Chun Ping'an shook his head and replied, he's always been trying his best to help me, so we don't need to doubt him in this regard. Zhu Lian couldn't help but stand up, with his figure hunched over as he said in a solemn voice, this isn't a minor matter. Chun Ping'an remained sitting, and he gently swirled his sword-nurturing gourd around as he said, of course this isn't a small matter. However, this doesn't matter. I've already made it through bigger plots and more perilous games of Go. Zhu Lian slowly paced around, rubbing his palms together as he replied, I need to give this some more thought. Chun Ping'an started to console Zhu Lian instead, saying, don't worry, this won't pertain to life or death, so we definitely won't encounter the kinds of deadly battles where every strike hits flesh. We won't face a perilous situation such as Du Mao suddenly appearing in Old Dragon City either. Zhu Lian thought about this for a moment, yet his brows were still knitted in a deep frown as he complained, then things will be even more troublesome. If that's the case, then doesn't it mean that I won't be able to help at all? Will I truly have to stand aside and watch on idly? That will stifle me to death. Chun Ping'an gazed at the opposite mountain face, straightening his back and placing his hands behind his head as he replied, forget about it, we'll take things one step at a time. After all, how can I be afraid to go home? Zhu Lian looked at Chun Ping'an and remarked, deal with problems as they come up? Young master appears quite calm and confident. Chun Ping'an suddenly sighed and said with emotion, having learned so many principles, I'll occasionally feel a little confused. Chun Ping'an bent down and placed his hands on top of his sword-nurturing gourd, continuing, the criss-crossing paths on the Go board represent a myriad of principles, and these principles and rules are all straightforward and set. However, worldly matters will cause these straight lines to become crooked, and the lines within some people's hearts might even become wonky circles. This is called self-justification. Thus, there are many people in the world who remain unreasonable, even after reading a large number of books. Similarly, there are also many people who only care about themselves and completely disregard other people. Even so, some of these people are able to enjoy very good lives because they're also able to calm their minds and feel at peace. In fact, they'll face even fewer restrictions than those who adhere to the rules and regulations. Regarding how to live, one simply needs to follow their own ideals and conscience. Regarding how to appear reasonable and feel at ease and justified with one's lifestyle, or how to live better by using this as a disguise, one can simply pick a few sentences from the plethora of classics belonging to the 3 teachings and 100 schools of thought. One can simply borrow a few principles that align with their own thinking. Is this difficult? No, not at all. Zhu Lian heaved a long sigh. He sat back down next to Chun Ping'an, putting down the pot of wine that he had already finished at some unknown time. Zhu Lian placed his hands on his knees, and the skinny and hunchbacked old man suddenly felt a little melancholy at this moment. If Chun Ping'an revealed these genuine thoughts to Sui Yubian, Wei Xian, and Lu Baixiang, the 3 of them most likely wouldn't be too stirred by his words. Sui Yubian possessed a pure sword heart and was entirely focused on the sword. Wei Xian was once an emperor who could rival an army of thousands, while Lu Baixiang was the founder of the demonic sect in the Lotus Flower-blessed land. Because of this, it was more interesting to reveal these thoughts to Zhu Lian. Zhu Lian appeared heartless on the surface, treating both big matters and small matters as if they were heartless matters. It was as if he didn't have a care in the world. In reality, however, Zhu Lian had witnessed and experienced the greatest variety of people and matters in the Lotus Flower-blessed land. He was born into a wealthy and powerful clan, allowing him to experience the extravagant lifestyle of true nobles, and giving him the opportunity to see the emperor and other influential officials from up close. He had also possessed incredible martial arts talent ever since a young age, but he had still followed his clan's wishes and attended the imperial examination even though he had soared to great heights on the path of martial arts cultivation. Zhu Lian had easily placed in the second band on the imperial examination, and the only reason he hadn't placed in the first band was because the key examiner, a pillar official and a senior from a friendly clan, had purposely pushed down his ranking. Otherwise, he would have at least placed first or second in the first band. At that time, Zhu Lian had already become the most renowned young master in the capital, with his calligraphy works, essays, and outings causing the hearts of countless young maidens to flutter. However, Julien only served as an official for a few years before finding an excuse to resign and travel around the world to seek knowledge. In reality, he was adventuring around the world and exploring the cultivation world. As time went on, the unrestrained young master mysteriously ended up becoming the most powerful person in the world. At the same time, he became a figure stuck in the minds of countless celestial maidens in the martial arts world and countless gallant heroines in the cultivation world. Afterward, chaotic wars broke out between the various nations, causing the mountains and rivers to shatter and crumble. Julien left the cultivation world and returned to his clan, entering the battlefield and becoming a graceful and knowledgeable general who had seemingly appeared from out of nowhere. During his 6 years on the battlefield, Julien relied on his military strategies instead of martial arts prowess to forcefully turn the tides, unexpectedly defending a nation on the brink of destruction for many years. However, the great trend was irreversible, and Julien was unable to prevent the nation from collapsing even after guiding a prince for many years as he personally managed the state affairs. In the end, Julien helped to resettle his clan before once again returning to the cultivation world. Julien remained single from the beginning to the end. According to Julien's explanation, he had still been carefree and romantic even when he was in his 40s and 50s. He had possessed the maturity of mellow wine, and he had still been a dream partner in the minds of many beautiful young women. "We're going to pass by a mansion owned by a female ghost afterward," Chun Ping'an said. "A plaque with the characters "Beautiful Water, Noble Wind" hangs in front of this mansion, and I plan to only bring you along with me when I visit. I'll ask Shiro to bring Pei Qian with her and take a detour around the mountain, and they can directly travel to a place called Red Candle Town and wait for us there." Julien was filled with eagerness as he smiled and asked, Young master mentioned this matter before, but only briefly and without much detail. By the looks of it, this trip will be dangerous but not overly so." Chun Ping'an nodded and replied, "There's a female ghost wearing a wedding dress living in that mansion, and I encountered some conflict with her when passing by with Bao Ping and the others back then. As such, I want to visit her to resolve things once and for all." A look of realization appeared on Julien's face, and he remarked, "No wonder young master asked Shiro about the innate abilities of ghosts and entities in such great detail recently. We also stopped many times on our journey, and as it turns out, young master has been nurturing his mind and energy and also creating many yellow paper talismans." Chun Ping'an suddenly raised a hand and said, "Shut up." Julien smiled sheepishly in response. As expected of his young master, he truly understood his subordinate. He hadn't managed to ask Chun Ping'an about the appearance of the female ghost in the wedding dress before, so he was truly curious about whether she was beautiful or ugly, slender or obese. After all, he had never been admired by a beautiful female ghost living in the tombs when he was still at the lotus flower-blessed land. As such, how could he let slip this opportunity now that he had come to the majestic world? However, the water goddess from the White Swan River was similar to Shiro in the sense that she hadn't taken a fancy to him either. Julien rubbed his chin and huffed in anger. What's going on? Regardless of whether they're ghosts or gods, all of the women here like to judge people by their appearances. Julien glanced at the wine pot beside him and said with a bitter expression, "Young master, my wine pot is already empty." He then put on a shameless expression, rubbing his hands together as he continued, "Young master, there's no need to worry about my ability to hold my alcohol. In Pei Qian's words, this is no problem at all. Having one more pot will allow me to quench my thirst, 2 more pots will leave me slightly inebriated, and 3 more pots will make me feel even better." Chun Ping'an chuckled and opened his mouth, bobbing his head around as he sucked in some air. He then turned around and gloated, "You can drink the wind." Julien tried to find the right words for half a day, and he decided to be a loyal official who provided proper advice this one time, refusing to be an obsequious official who curried up to his superiors. He was brimming with a righteous aura as he said, "Young master, it's very difficult for this old servant to flatter you when you make such an unfunny joke." Something tugged at Chun Ping'an's mind, and he retrieved a pot of wine from his minimization treasure and tossed it to Julien, asking, "Julien, what kind of person do you think I am?" Julien caught the pot of wine and replied without hesitation, "A good person." Chun Ping'an smiled and remarked, By the looks of it, I didn't waste this pot of wine on you. Julien shook his head and said, I would have said the same thing even if you didn't give me this pot of wine. I am indeed a good person, Chen Ping'an murmured to himself. Julien laughed heartily and said, Young master, just pretend that I was flattering you. Don't take things to heart. In any case, it's time for a drink. One was an old man from a wealthy and influential clan, and one was a young man from a rundown and impoverished alley. In reality, however, neither of them cared much about the master and subordinate relationship between them. At this moment, they were slowly enjoying some fine wine by the edge of a cliff. Julien wiped the corners of his mouth and suddenly asked, Young master, do you want to hear a song from my hometown? Sure thing, Chen Ping'an said with a nod. Julien hurriedly took a small sip of wine to moisten his throat, and only then did he start to hum and sing, bobbing his head around as he sang using the imperial dialect of an empire that had long since vanished in the lotus flower-blessed land. Anu. Chen Ping'an naturally didn't understand him, yet Julien appeared relaxed and intoxicated as he sang. Because of this, Chen Ping'an was able to enjoy the song even though he was completely oblivious to the lyrics. After finishing the song, Julien asked, How did you find it, young master? Not bad at all, Chen Ping'an replied with a nod. Julien swirled his remaining half a pot of wine around and offered, I can repeat the song in the official dialect of the Great Li Empire if young master is willing to reward me with another pot of wine. Chen Ping'an didn't hesitate as he directly tossed Julien another pot of wine. Julien put the pot of wine aside and sang softly, lanterns shining as bright as one's eyes, illuminating the lady undoing her buttons, her slender fingers untying the silk ribbons. Her skin white and her bosom shapely like a mountain, her belly supple and soft like cotton. 'Tis a shame the lantern cannot see. Her smooth back leading into her slender waist. Her figure like a gourd. The young lady thinks of her heartless lover yet to return from his distant journey. Butterflies in her stomach, worries in her heart. The lady twists her hips and glances back at the two pillows, interlacing her fingers and sighing in sorrow. If time was worth its weight in gold, then who would earn those 1,000 taels of gold? Julien stopped singing and took a swig of wine, feeling quite satisfied with himself. Is that all? Chen Ping'an asked. Julien was astonished, and he appeared slightly dazed as he replied, Young master actually doesn't want to hit me? Chen Ping'an snickered and replied, I've journeyed through the cultivation world for so long, so I can be regarded as someone who has witnessed all kinds of people and matters. When traveling through the Dragon Channel on an intercontinental ship back then, the guests staying in the room above me were making love with each other both day and night. Heh! This was called having 20/20 hindsight. In reality, Chen Ping'an had only learned about these matters thanks to Julien and thanks to his extensive journey through the river of time in the lotus flower-blessed land. Please expand, Julien asked. Chen Ping'an smiled with squinted eyes and replied, Sure thing. However, you have to give back the pot of wine first. Julien hesitated for a moment before passing the pot of wine back to Chen Ping'an. Chen Ping'an placed the pot of wine in his minimization treasure and summarized, Those were truly intense and soul-stirring battles. Julien waited for half a day, yet he heard nothing else from his young master. That's all? He asked. Or else? Chen Ping'an replied as he stood up. Julien hurriedly stood up and chased after Chen Ping'an, exclaiming, Young master, give me back that pot of wine. You only said a measly few words, and saying them was as good as saying nothing at all. It wasn't worth one pot of wine. Chen Ping'an paid no heed to Julien's protest. He flipped upside down on the plank road and started to walk forward, while practicing the heaven and earth stance. Julien stood still and wallowed in regret. After a while, he suddenly turned around to look at the meditating Shiro, cracking a grin as he did so. Shiro opened her eyes and fumed. Get lost. Julien raised a hand and made an orchid finger pose, gently waving it at Shiro and saying in an effeminate voice, You're such a meanie. Shiro felt extremely repulsed. However, she immediately became dumbfounded after catching a fleeting glance of something. As it turned out, Julien had placed a finger on his sideburns and performed two actions, tearing back and pushing forward, pausing ever so slightly between the two motions. The hunchbacked old man grinned at Shiro before turning around and slowly walking away with his hands clasped behind his back. He started to stroll around under the night sky by himself. He left behind Ro, the beautiful skeletal ghost, who looked like she had seen a ghost. In the distance, Julien clicked his tongue in wonder and remarked, "How uninteresting." After traversing the plank roads and passing the border between the Southern Garden Nation and the Great Li Empire, Qian Ping'an and Julien walked along a mountain path located within a majestic mountain range. Ro had already left with Pei Qian, taking a detour around the mountains and following the road beside the embroidered flower river as they made their way to Red Candle Town. This was where they would all meet up afterward. Moreover, Qian Ping'an told Ro to carry Pei Qian on her back, and he also allowed her to use her mystical abilities. Thus, assuming everything went smoothly, they would definitely arrive at Red Candle Town before him and Julien. Qian Ping'an smiled and recounted an event from the past. Back then, it was on this mountain path that he had come across a Taoist priest and his 2 disciples. One of the disciples, a lame young boy, had been carrying an old and tattered banner with the characters, "Subduing demons and capturing ghosts, eliminating fiends and safeguarding Tao." In the end, both parties had faced a calamity together, being captured by the female ghost in a wedding dress and brought to the mansion that was decorated with countless large red lanterns. Fortunately, they had eventually managed to escape from the mansion unscathed. Before parting ways, the impoverished old Taoist priest had given Qian Ping'an a mountain scouring album passed down by the ancestors in his force. However, he and his 2 disciples hadn't stayed in the small town when passing through the Dragon Spring Prefecture. Instead, they had simply visited Ruanxiu before continuing northward on their journey to the capital of the Great Li Empire, saying that they wanted to try their luck there. Qian Ping'an purposely chose to climb the mountain at night, returning to the small mountain path where they had become trapped all those years ago. He stopped and looked around, yet he didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Qian Ping'an was carrying his bamboo bookcase and sword immortal on his back, and he felt like he somewhat looked like a young scholar at this moment. However, it made sense that the female ghost in the wedding dress wasn't charging out to capture him straight away. Back then, the Wind Snow Temple's Wei Jin had shattered the barrier with a single sword strike, after which the gallant Su Rua had also appeared at the scene. Thus, it was understandable that the female ghost didn't really dare to harm passing scholars after having such a traumatizing experience. Qian Ping'an thought for a moment before saying to Julien, "Fly up and see whether you can detect the presence of that mansion. However, I don't have high hopes, and it's almost certain that it's hidden by an illusion technique." Julien shot up into the sky, displaying his ability as a far-roaming tier martial artist, one who could travel to anywhere in the world. A short moment later, Julien returned to the small mountain path and said with a shake of his head, "I indeed can't see anything, and it looks like I'll need to waste 2 of young master's talismans." Qian Ping'an smiled and retrieved 2 talismans, a young energy illumination talisman, and a mountain and water barrier shattering talisman. He had crafted these talismans using the yellow paper talismans from the stack of talisman paper that Li Shixing had given him. Pinching the 2 talismans in his fingers, he funneled the spiritual energy accumulated in his acupoint that housed the golden scholarly core into the yang energy illumination talisman. The flickering flame on the talisman was extremely small. Qian Ping'an leaped onto a branch and turned around in a circle, carefully observing the flame size and combustion speed of the yang energy illumination talisman as he did so. After doing this, he was able to determine the rough direction of the mansion. They would follow the guidance of the yang energy illumination talisman to look for the barrier concealing the mansion, and this was similar to mortal humans using a lantern to illuminate the path in front of them as they walked around at night. In the end, the small flame suddenly erupted as Qian Ping'an walked up to a mountain face. He flicked his wrist and filled the mountain and water barrier shattering talisman with spiritual energy, causing it to glow with brilliance as he slapped it onto the mountain face. The landscape in front of them transformed drastically, with the mountain face rapidly melting away like snow exposed to flames. A palm-sized hole appeared, and looking through this hole, they could already see a dark and eerie path through a mountain valley. At the same time, concentrated yin energy continued to surge outward. When the mountain and water barrier shattering talisman finished burning up, the hole in the mountain face had already grown to the size of a courtyard door, allowing Qian Ping'an and Julien to stride inside. There was a towering ancient tree in the valley, and Chan Ping'an continued to hold the Yang Energy Illumination Talisman in his fingers as he dashed forward with Zhu Lian. Only less than half of the Yang Energy Illumination Talisman had been used up. Zhu Lian's feet didn't touch the ground as he followed Chan Ping'an. Chan Ping'an didn't go into detail about his previous encounter with the female ghost. However, Zhu Lian had never before seen Chan Ping'an show such genuine stubbornness and persistence on a seemingly minor matter. In order to visit the female ghost in the wedding dress, Chan Ping'an had made many initial preparations and come up with many different plans. Zhu Lian had experienced the deadly situation alongside Chan Ping'an in Old Dragon City, and he had felt like Chan Ping'an was extremely meticulous and careful when making plans in the dust medicinal shop. He would weigh up the pros and cons regardless of how minor the matter was. The situation right now was similar, yet not completely so. For example, Chan Ping'an had already been waiting for this day for a very long time. When this day finally arrived, Chan Ping'an's reaction was quite strange. It was as if he were adopting Zhu Lian's ape-like posture when throwing punches, always bending down and curling up before throwing a punch. This was completely different from the bold and spirited attacks of ordinary pure martial artists, where one would stand up straight and confidently unleash their fist intent. The Yang Energy Illumination Talisman started to burn quicker, and when the final flakes of ashes floated to the ground, the two of them were finally standing on a plaza and facing the majestic mansion. The plaque with the divinely written characters, "Beautiful Water, Noble Wind," hung in front of the mansion, and to the sides of the entrance were two gigantic stone lions. Chan Ping'an narrowed his eyes as he looked up at the plaque. A female ghost wearing a bright red wedding dress had once hovered near that plaque. She was deeply in love, and she had once been a good-natured ghost who always adhered to her own principles. It was said that in the very beginning, a scholar traveling through the mountain paths at night had loudly recited sagely poems in order to muster up some courage. This had caught the female ghost's attention. Afterward, the scholar and the female ghost had fallen in love even though one was a human and one was a ghost. Not only that, but she had willingly put on the bright red wedding dress as well. Chan Ping'an pursed his lips. The notions of right and wrong didn't differentiate between relatives, friends, and strangers. This was something that Chan Ping'an had said himself. Those who didn't adhere to any principles or reasons lived freely, and did whatever made them happy. If they came across someone who adhered to principles and was more powerful than them, however, then they could only hope to experience a good reincarnation after death. This was also something that Chan Ping'an had said. At this moment, Zhu Lian couldn't help but turn his head to look at Chan Ping'an. He was a far-roaming tier martial artist, yet even he was surprised by the peculiar aura emanating from Chan Ping'an's body. Was this the aura of a pure martial artist reaching the consummate level of the 5th tier? It was much like a bright moon rising into the sky. However, this wasn't the most surprising aspect, as this was a phenomenon that still belonged to the normal realm of martial arts. What astonished Zhu Lian even more was the external manifestation of Chan Ping'an's aura and mind's realm. The bright moon was like a jewel held in the mouth of a flood dragon. Just when Zhu Lian thought that this ghost hunting trip would probably have nothing to do with him anymore, the door of the mansion suddenly opened, with one person walking out. Zhu Lian couldn't help but ask, "Young master, is he the female ghost lover? He appears quite impressive, and it appears that his position is no inferior to that of Lady Xiaoluan's position as river goddess of the White Swan River." The person who walked out was solidly built and suited in armor, and there was a golden-eyed green snake coiled around his arm and releasing curling white mist into the air as it breathed. This looked much like the rising incense smoke in the temples. Chan Ping'an recognized this person, having once seen him appear on the embroidered flower river with Su Ru. It was extremely likely that he was either the river god of the embroidered flower river, or the fine wine river. There were many interesting aspects about the embroidered flower river, the fine wine river, Go Table Mountain, and this mansion, and Weibo had once revealed that these places were all secretly used to suppress the remnant fortune of the destroyed Divine Water Nation. As such, the river gods of the embroidered flower river and the fine wine river enjoyed slightly higher statuses than the other river gods who ruled over jurisdictions of similar size and importance. Chan Ping'an, breaking through the mountain and water barrier without permission and wantonly barging into the Chu clan's residence is a serious crime according to the mountain sealing laws of the Great Li Empire. The river god of the embroidered flower river scolded in a solemn voice. Even an official immortal will lose their citizenship and recognition as an official immortal if they break this law. They'll also be banished to hundreds upon thousands of kilometers away. Where is Lady Chu? Chen Pingyan asked in puzzlement. The river god waved a hand and replied, she left the residence a long time ago. Moreover, this mansion already has a new owner. Seeing that you possess a peace and safety tablet, this matter has already been recorded on the documents of the Ministry of Rights. I permit you to make haste and leave now. Don't let this happen again. Chen Pingyan cupped his fists and asked, dare I ask, river god, where is Lady Chu now? Chen Pingyan sighed upon hearing this. This was most likely going to end up as a wasted trip, so he started to feel slightly pained about wasting 2 yellow paper talismans. He apologized to the water god, saying, I apologize for visiting so rashly. I'll definitely be more careful next time. The water god chuckled coldly and asked, there's still going to be a next time? Before Chen Pingyan could speak, the water god shot a sideways glance at the hunchbacked old man and continued, what, you feel like you can wantonly do as you please just because you're a far-roaming tier martial artist? Julien suddenly rubbed his face, turning to Chen Pingyan and saying, young master, I'm begging you, please let me fight against him. He's far too punchable, and he's asking for a beating. I'll definitely give young master a gold essence copper coin in return. Chen Pingyan signaled with his eyes that there was no need for Julien to fight with the river god to verify the situation. The female ghost in the wedding dress was most likely not in the mansion. Chen Pingyan smiled at the river god and said, we'll take our leave now. At this moment, a burst of rolling black smoke suddenly appeared behind the Chu clan's residence, making a huge commotion as it surged over with vigor. It then landed on the ground and transformed into a person wearing a black robe. Master Gu, aren't you repairing the mountain roots and water veins? The river god of the embroidered flower river asked expressionlessly. Chen Pingyan had never imagined that the current master of the residence would be the Yin god from the Gu clan, who had once protected him and his companions on a long stretch of their journey. Not only that, but he was also Gu Can's father. The Yin god nodded in acknowledgement to Chen Pingyan, after which he smiled faintly at the river god and explained, I detected a cultivator shattering the barrier just then, but I initially paid no heed to the situation because I knew that esteemed river god was coincidentally checking on the progress of things in the residence. However, upon recalling the chaotic situation of the Great Li Empire right now, I became worried that it might be a cultivator from the Great Sui nation trying to forcefully damage the foundation of this land. Unexpectedly, it's actually a familiar face coming to visit. The river god narrowed his eyes and said, Master Gu accompanied Chen Pingyan to the Great Sui nation back then, so it can indeed be said that he's a familiar face. Perhaps Master Gu wants to invite Chen Pingyan inside and prepare an extravagant meal to welcome him. The Yin god from the Gu clan laughed heartily and replied, since I'm the new master of this residence, I naturally don't dare to delay the proper matters at hand. I'll simply speak a few words with Chen Pingyan before seeing him out of the jurisdiction of the Chu clan's residence. Repairing the mountain roots and water veins is a sensitive task that can't be paused. As such, I hope that Master Gu won't delay things for too long, or else I'll definitely fulfill my duty and record your dereliction of duty on the official documents, the river god said. He then turned around and strode into the mansion. The Yin god from the Gu clan cupped his fists in gratitude before walking over to Chen Pingyan. Before the delighted Chen Pingyan could open his mouth and say anything, the Yin god laughed loudly and said, there's nothing I can do about this. After accompanying you to the Great Sui nation back then, I was rewarded with a difficult position by the Ministry of Rights. I became a nondescript mountain god, so I'm unable to do as I please and therefore unable to invite you inside the mansion as a guest. Chen Pingyan smiled and replied, that's not a problem. There will be many opportunities in the future, and this place isn't too far away from the Dragon Spring Prefecture either. The Yin god suddenly bowed deeply, a look of sorrow on his face as he said, I left without saying goodbye back then, and I didn't dare to mention a private matter because of the official task I was carrying out. Now that I'm a deity of the Great Li Empire, I can borrow this opportunity to reveal my secret, even though I'm unable to freely leave this place due to my responsibilities. Revealing this secret will also make me feel more at ease. A smile appeared on the Yin god's face after he said this, and he channeled a mystical ability that caused his initially fuzzy appearance to become increasingly sharp and clear. Who do I look like? He asked. Chen Ping'an observed his appearance for a moment before exclaiming in astonishment. It can't be that? The Yin god laughed heartily, once again cupping his fists as he said, Chen Ping'an, it was thanks to you that Gu can manage to obtain such a huge fated opportunity. This is a huge debt of gratitude, and it's not an exaggeration to say that I'll be willing to do anything to repay you. Chen Ping'an took a long time to compose himself after hearing the astonishing revelation, and he murmured, No wonder I had a nagging feeling that you were always watching me in secret. Back then I thought you had some kind of ulterior motive. Uncle Gu, you should have told me right from the very beginning. Afterward, they chatted about some trivial matters regarding the people and events in Clay Vase Alley, and it wasn't long before they arrived near the mountain and water barrier concealing the mansion. There was a pained expression on the Yin god's face as he said, I didn't dare to break the rules. Oh, that's right, just as the river god said, the Chu clan's residence is in a bad state, with the mountain roots and water veins severely damaged and barely keeping together. As such, I can't leave the residence for too long, so I won't be able to see you off any further than this. Let's say our goodbyes here. Chen Ping'an smiled and said, I'm going to return home via Old Dragon City this time. But because Bamboo Scroll Lake is located in the central region of the eastern treasured Vile continent where war is raging, almost no immortal ship is willing to take the risk and sail over there. Even so, I plan to make a trip to Bamboo Scroll Lake soon to check in on Gukin Uncle Gu. Do you know how Gukin is doing right now? Is the river severing true lord treating him well? The Yin god laughed heartily and replied, Gukan and his mother are doing extremely well. Little Kin has already become the river-severing True Lord's direct disciple, and there's not a single thing for him to worry about. Otherwise, how could I feel at ease enough to stay here? Chen Ping'an nodded in understanding, cupping his fists and saying, I wish Uncle Gu a swift journey up the godly ranks. One other thing, Chen Ping'an, the Yin god said in a quiet voice. Have you heard about what's going on back in our hometown? Many immortal forces who bought mountains back then are starting to sell them at very low prices. So it's best that you make haste and return as soon as possible. If you're lucky, you might manage to buy 1 or 2 mountains for a very good price. Make sure not to let slip such an incredible opportunity. Chen Ping'an smiled and replied, I'm already aware of this, so I used a flying sword to deliver a message to Cloud Drape Mountain, asking Wei Bo to help me take a look. The Yin god waved a hand, causing a large door to materialize on the mountain and water barrier. Chen Ping'an stepped inside, turning around and cupping his fists in farewell as he did so. As he walked along the mountain path, Chen Ping'an sighed with emotion and said, I never would have expected that Uncle Gu actually became a Yin god. Not only that, but he even became the master of the Chu clan's residence. However, I wonder when his family of 3 will finally be able to reunite. Julien smiled faintly and said, Even though we didn't find the female ghost in the wedding dress, this trip to the mansion was definitely no waste. Just like Go Table Mountain that young master mentioned to me before, that was an unfortunate place where Wei Bo was reduced to nothing more than a mountain lord, one of the lowest ranked deities. At the same time, however, it was also a miraculous place where Wei Bo rapidly rose to become the formal god of the Great Li Empire's northern mountain. This is the unpredictable nature of the world. Chen Ping'an took a deep breath and said, Let's go. It's time to head to Red Candle Town. The two of them quickened their pace slightly, heading to Red Candle Town where Pei Qian and Shiro were waiting for them. Chen Ping'an and Julien continued to casually chat with each other all the way until they were dozens of kilometers away from the mountain where the mansion was located. Julien slowed down, carefully compressing his voice into a thread using his power as a martial artist as he suddenly asked, What should we do next, young master? Chen Ping'an's expression remained calm and composed as he also compressed his voice into a thread and replied, There's no hurry. We'll plan the next steps when we arrive at Red Candle Town. Otherwise, Uncle Gu will definitely face grave danger. At the entrance of the Chu clan's mansion, the river god of the embroidered flower river had a dark expression as he looked at the slowly returning Yin god, and he scolded in a stern voice, Gu Tao, I told you to obediently stay near the main water fortune vein in the mansion and not move a single step away. Yet, you actually dared to run out without my permission. The solidly built water god who had a green snake coiled around his arm shook his arm and caused the snake to open its eyes. After the snake slithered to the ground, It coiled its body once more and transformed into a gigantic snake that was as thick as a water bucket. It then slowly slithered forward, using its body to create a large circle that contained both its master and Gu Tao. It then raised its head and coldly stared at the Yin god. The water god raised a hand and made a grabbing motion, causing a long lance to instantly materialize in his grip. The lance was refined and shimmering with a water-like golden glow, and the water god sneered. The Imperial Preceptor said that I could destroy half of your soul if you dared to make any transgressions. If you're unwilling to yield and accept this punishment, then you can try to borrow the power of the Chu clan's residents to resist. Gu Tao remained motionless with a look of helplessness on his face as he explained. I only left the mansion because I wanted to reveal that secret to Chan Ping'an. It was stuck with me for far too long, and I felt like I had to get it off my chest. You've come here on an official mission this time, and you also warned me about this beforehand, so I accept my punishment. However, I hope you can answer one question before you punish me. Why am I not even allowed to see Chan Ping'an? I hope you can give me a good explanation for this. Otherwise, I'll feel dissatisfied even if I accept my punishment. The river god stared intently at the Yin god. He wasn't hesitating about whether or not he should destroy half of Gu Tao's soul, and he was instead contemplating whether he should directly pulverize the entirety of Gu Tao's soul. It was up to him whether he killed or spared Gu Tao. Regardless, it was without a doubt that Gu Tao would definitely suffer severe pain and punishment. However, the river god did indeed require Gu Tao's help to repair the fortune of the Chu clan's residents right now. In any case, this region belonged to the jurisdiction of the Northern Mountain, and as the first formal god of the Great Li Empire's 5 mountains, Wei Bo was displaying more and more of his might and dignity as a powerful god as the days went on. Because of this, the river god of the Embroidered Flower River needed to inform and seek guidance from the Imperial Preceptor regarding when he should punish Gu Tao and destroy half of his soul. At the same time, he also needed to report this matter to Wei Bo according to the laws of the Great Li Empire. This was a case of seeking help from the directly responsible official being more practical than seeking help from a high-ranking official. Gu Tao hadn't shown any signs of persuading Chan Ping'an to visit Bamboo Scroll Lake, and he had instead persuaded Chan Ping'an to return home to buy a few mountains for cheap. If it weren't for this, the river god would have already lashed out and obliterated Gu Tao's soul. In fact, this was only reasonable. Gu Tao had secretly obtained news about Bamboo Scroll Lake from Red Candle Town several times. Yet the news that he was given was nothing more than news that the spies of the Great Li Empire wanted him to know. The river god suddenly launched his lance without warning, sending it through Gu Tao's abdomen and diagonally pinning him to the ground. Golden light erupted from the lance, directly searing a hole in Gu Tao's body. His body had transformed from that of a Yin god into that of a deity, yet he still suffered a grave wound after being struck by the river god's attack. Gu Tao was indeed a tough and unyielding person, and he refused to make a sound even as his face started to twist in pain. Plumes of black smoke rose from his body. The river god waved a hand, unfurling a picture scroll and capturing all of the scenes within the jurisdiction of the Chu clan's residents. The images on the picture scroll rapidly played out and transformed according to the river god's wishes, and the people and matters in the picture scroll were completely exposed down to the smallest detail. The river god then unfurled another picture scroll, capturing the scenes within the jurisdiction of the Embroidered Flower River. His voice was cold and harsh as he spat. If there's just anything that leaves me with an inkling of doubt, then I would rather kill you than leave you alive, even if my suspicions are proven wrong. Standing there with the golden lance still running through his abdomen, Gu Tao roared in anger. Have you gone mad? Will the Imperial Preceptor truly allow you to act with such wanton disregard? Do you think I'm unaware of the fact that you've already been attracted to Lady Chu for several hundred years? What, you dislike me because I've taken over Lady Chu's residence, so you're hell-bent on killing me now? If you want to condemn someone, you can always trump up a charge. Is that how it is? Very well indeed. You've allowed me to understand the magnanimity of the river god of the Embroidered Flower River. The river god paid no heed to the aggrieved and indignant exclamations of Gu Tao, and he simply lowered his head and focused on the speech and actions of Chan Ping'an and Zhu Lian in the picture scroll. He observed their expressions and conversations, and he was unwilling to let slip a single detail. As for what the Imperial Preceptor was plotting, The river god of the embroidered flower river didn't care about this at all. In any case, he didn't dare to probe the plans of the imperial preceptor, not in the least. During the past 100 or so years in the Great Li Empire, the imperial preceptor had largely stood in the shadows of the emperor. Every time he walked out of the shadows, he would definitely bring with him gusts of sanguine wind and bursts of blood rain. Countless heads would roll, not discriminating between wealthy nobles or immortals from the mountain. No one could escape, not even pillar officials or powerful governors who held important positions, and not even earth immortals. One could either disappear without a trace or suffer a torturous fate worse than death. The river god waved a hand and retrieved his long lance, saying, "Make haste and return to the underground of the mansion to continue repairing the fortune of the region. Await my command, and pray to the heavens if you want to stay alive." Gu Tao clutched his stomach, with the damage to his godly body and cultivation base leaving him in agonizing pain. "You should be roughly aware of my identity and background, so just know that this isn't going to be the end of this matter," he roared. "The strongest protection in the Great Li Empire is the laws that the imperial preceptor helped the emperor establish," the river god replied with an apathetic expression. Chen Pingyan and his companions walked along the gently flowing embroidered flower river, and arrived at the bustling Red Candle town. It was at a bookshop in this town that Chen Pingyan had once bought a book, The Severed Water Cliff, for Li Huai. Pei Qian and Shi Rou were staying at the inn that Chen Pingyan had stayed at several years ago. After entering the room, Pei Qian was just about to tell her master about all the fun and entertaining things in Red Candle town. However, she immediately stopped herself after seeing Chen Pingyan's expression. Julien closed the door and stood near the window. Chen Pingyan remained solemn and silent. When he finally spoke, he directly said, "I've changed my plans and won't return to Dragon Spring Prefecture first. Julien, you take care of Pei Qian and Shi Rou and head to Downtrodden Mountain. There's an immortal ferry station at the Yellow Court Nation, so I'll make my way there to test my luck. Maybe there'll be an immortal ship to Bamboo Scroll Lake. If there isn't, and if I'm left with no other option, then I'll travel to Bamboo Scroll Lake on foot. In any case, it will be very difficult for me to leave once I return to Dragon Spring Prefecture." Julien thought for a moment before saying slowly, "I know an okay disguise technique, so why don't I disguise as young master while young master disguises as some other random person? We can then find a suitable opportunity for young master to leave Red Candle Town first, and the rest of us will stay here for a few more days. This will give us a slightly better chance at success. We might not be able to deceive our opponents, but giving it a go won't hurt." Shi Rou was extremely puzzled. Pei Qian was feeling even more baffled. "Young master, you always say this yourself. One shouldn't hurry, and one should always take things one step at a time," Julien added quietly. Chen Pingyan smiled and replied, "Rest assured, I know what I'm doing." Julien nodded and said, "Young master is a careful and astute individual after all. Otherwise, Cui Dongshan would have presumably lost this game of Go once young master arrived at the Dragon Spring Prefecture." With the river god of the embroidered flower river appearing first and then Uncle Gu rushing over afterward, Chen Pingyan had noticed a hint of a familiar aura. Thus, Chen Pingyan had chosen to remain silent at the time, waiting for Uncle Gu to speak first. He hadn't greeted Gu Tao and referred to him as Uncle Gu straight away. Uncle Gu had delivered a subtle message in his words, revealing his identity as Gu Can's father for the first time. And thus, Chen Pingyan had cooperated with Uncle Gu and put on a performance for the river god, giving Chen Pingyan a friendly reminder to make haste and return to the Dragon Spring Prefecture to buy a few mountains, saying that Gu Can and his mother were doing very well at Bamboo Scroll Lake. Chen Pingyan could take the reverse of these statements as true. Moreover, there was a sense of tacit understanding between Chen Pingyan and Gu Tao, and the two of them made sure not to speak an extra word or make additional eye contact. They knew that the river god was definitely watching them in secret. Afterward, Julien helped Chen Pingyan go through the plan in more detail. For example, they would board a small boat and enjoy some unique flower wine served by the boat hostesses tonight. There were many people and many pairs of eyes in those places, making it the optimal location to get spied on. Chen Pingyan took off his Dao robe, golden sweet wine, which he definitely needed to wear to Bamboo Scroll Lake afterward, and he changed into azure robes in order to make it easier for Julien to disguise as him and head to Downtrodden Mountain later. Otherwise, it would appear far too abnormal if Julien suddenly traveled to Downtrodden Mountain without golden sweet wine. Just Chen Ping'an and Julien continued to scrutinize and refine their plan. Pei Qian obediently sat beside them, not disturbing them or making any untimely jokes. Shiro stood guard near the window. She didn't think that Julien was taking advantage of things for his own benefit by suggesting that he and Chen Ping'an drink flower wine. At night, Chen Ping'an and Julien left the inn, enjoying some flower wine with the boat hostesses. Chen Ping'an sat prim and upright the entire time, while Julien took to the situation like a fish in water. He enjoyed an intimate conversation with the young boat hostess, making her feel regretful that she had been born too late. The next day, Chen Ping'an strolled around Red Candle Town with Pei Qian, buying all kinds of goods. They were nearing home and winter was also coming, so they were seemingly buying goods to prepare for the new year. An ordinary-looking middle-aged man silently left Red Candle Town. He didn't board a ship to travel down the embroidered flower river, and he instead chose a bustling official road to leave the town and head to the border. When approaching the border pass, he didn't show his passport or travel documents to enter the Yellow Court Nation through proper means. Rather, he was like an unfettered vagrant cultivator as he easily crossed the towering mountains and majestic peaks. Afterward, he traveled both day and night with little rest. The travel-worn middle-aged man arrived at an immortal ferry station in the Yellow Court Nation, yet he didn't explicitly ask the station supervisor about immortal ships to Bamboo Scroll Lake. Rather, he obtained this information through a casual conversation, and he learned that there were no immortal ships traveling directly to his intended destination. In fact, this route had been cancelled a long time ago. Thus, the middle-aged boarded an immortal ship to a place called Gusu Mountain. It was said that he could take another immortal ship from Gusu Mountain to a vassal state of the luminous Vermilion Empire. Afterward, he would have to travel to Bamboo Scroll Lake on foot. He paid some immortal coins and obtained a one-person room on the immortal ship, barely ever venturing out during the entire journey. However, the middle-aged man was hit with a piece of bad news after he arrived at Gusu Mountain. Even the immortal ship to the vassal state of the luminous Vermilion Empire had now been paused. He stopped at Gusu Mountain for a day and wandered around, eventually paying a hefty sum of immortal coins, far more than the ordinary amount, to hire a private immortal ship that didn't want to adhere to the rules. He paid half the sum as a deposit, and he boarded the immortal ship under the obsequious gaze of the ship's owner, who was looking at him as if he were an idiot. He was the only passenger on the immortal ship. He was surrounded by praying eyes. Perhaps the man was inexperienced in the cultivation world and unaware of the dangers, or perhaps he was powerful and brave and purposely ignoring the threats. When the ship's owner notified the man that they were going to dock to replenish some necessities, the man finally stepped out of his room. He had changed into white robes, and he now had a sword on his back, a hairpin in his hair, and a wine gourd by his waist. The man directly walked up to the Sea Observation tier ship owner and patted his seemingly ordinary vermilion wine gourd, causing a flying sword to immediately soar out. Immortal coins are easy to earn, but you only get one go at life. The ship owner, an old cultivator, had already developed thoughts of killing the man to steal his treasures a long time ago. He had come from a rough background as well, so he gave up on trying to conceal his intentions since his passenger had already seen through him. He glanced at the wine gourd and chuckled. "Passenger, perhaps you're unaware of how people in my field view things. A sword-nurturing gourd is worth more to me than my life plus this entire ship. Do you think?" However, the flying sword immediately vanished in a flash before the old cultivator could finish speaking. The old cultivator was a vagrant cultivator who had climbed to the Sea Observation tier, after all, so he was quite familiar with sword cultivators, one of the four most difficult breeds to deal with in the cultivation world. Moreover, he coincidentally had a spirit tool trump card that could somewhat rival bonded flying swords. However, just when the old cultivator used his bonded tool to just barely block the flying sword, another flying sword shot out from the sword-nurturing gourd and pierced his glabella. The flying sword didn't kill him, but if he dared to make any movements, the tip of the sword could easily push forward and end his life. The Sea Observation tier cultivator was stunned that this sword cultivator actually possessed two bonded flying swords. It was also at this moment that a fist struck his body, The powerful strike caused the spiritual energy in his acupoints to bubble like boiling water. Another fist arrived. The old cultivator could channel his spiritual energy to temper his physique, allowing the toughness of his body to rival that of fourth-tier martial artists. Even so, he still heaved after being punched, and he quickly collapsed to the ground and became limp. 2 flying swords pierced into 2 of the old cultivator's bonded acupoints, hacking them to bits and causing the old cultivator to instantly drop from the C observation tier to the abode tier. The old cultivator wailed in grief and agony. The middle-aged man looked around before sitting down on a chair and saying to the other crew members, "Keep sailing to our destination." Afterward, the old cultivator sat in the corner of the room that was relatively spacious, with the 2 flying swords slowly circling around him the entire time. Meanwhile, his passenger surprisingly sat there and started to read. The old cultivator mustered his courage and asked whether or not he could attend to his wounds, lest he fail to even stay at the abode tier. The man nodded in response, not making any objections. The man continued to read book after book, occasionally nodding off and occasionally standing up to unhurriedly walk around and slowly throw punches. When the immortal ship arrived at the largest vassal state of the luminous Vermilion Empire, the man paid the remaining half of the immortal coins before disembarking. He asked the listless old cultivator for the approximate direction of Bamboo Scroll Lake, after which he removed the sword from his back and tossed it into the air, scabbard and all. He was going to fly his sword to Bamboo Scroll Lake. Eagles soared through the sky, crows cawed on the dead branches. The previously wide and smoothly paved official road was already in tatters, forcing a convoy of horse-drawn carriages to endure an extremely bumpy journey. Located to the northwest of the luminous Vermilion Empire, the Stonebrush Nation was the largest vassal state of the empire, and was renowned throughout the central region of the eastern treasured Vile continent for its abundant fertile fields and bountiful yields. Because of this, it was a huge provider of grain and other produce for the luminous Vermilion Empire. Even though the Stonebrush Nation was also a vassal state, they had chosen a completely different path to the Yellow Court Nation, a vassal state of the Great Sway Nation. From the emperor to the imperial court, pillar officials, and the large majority of border generals, almost everyone in the Stonebrush Nation chose to fight head-on against the heavy cavalry of the Greatly Empire. Flames of war raged throughout the entire Stonebrush Nation, with the battles to the north of the capital being especially intense and tragic since the new year. Right now, the capital of the Stonebrush Nation was already completely surrounded by enemies. Not only were the ordinary citizens of the Stonebrush Nation worried, but even the surrounding vassal states that were smaller in size and much weaker in military strength were filled with anxiety. Of course, there was no shortage of so-called smart people who surrendered to the Greatly Empire's Imperial Song clan right from the very beginning, choosing to spectate the wars from afar and waiting to laugh at the victims. They hoped that the unstoppable heavy cavalry of the Greatly Empire could take things one step further and directly massacre everyone in the cities, executing those officials of the Stonebrush Nation who were foolishly loyal to the luminous Vermilion Empire. Perhaps the Greatly Empire would even thank them, traitors of the Stonebrush Nation, since it was with their help that the heavy cavalry had managed to obtain numerous weapon arsenals, treasuries and large cities without shedding a single drop of blood. The bumpy ride over the broken official road caused many carriage drivers in the convoy to grumble endlessly in complaint. In fact, many of the strong young men who were carrying bows and sabers felt like their bodies were going to fall apart as well. Everyone was sore and listless, yet they still forcefully mustered up some energy to scan the surroundings for danger, lest they be ambushed by rogues and bandits. They were genuinely putting their lives on the line in order to earn some silver. In fact, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that they might suddenly lose their heads when they were out pissing one day. During their journey, the most dangerous and deadly battle hadn't been caused by the bandits formed from the refugees. Instead, 300 soldiers of the Stonebrush Nation had surprisingly disguised themselves as bandits and treated the convoy of merchants as a big and juicy victim. The battle had been intense, and almost half of the mercenaries who had already signed death waivers were either injured or killed. In fact, it was thanks to a hidden immortal among their employers that the outcome hadn't been worse. Otherwise, their entire convoy would have been captured and destroyed by the soldiers. As the convoy traveled to Bamboo Scroll Lake, a place viewed as a tiger's den by the mortal empires, they needed to travel through the middle of the Stonebrush Nation in order to reach the border in the north. Even though the mercenaries had been paid a huge sum of silver, They still didn't dare to walk through the border pass and cross the border. They refused to do so regardless of how much silver they were offered. Thankfully, the dozen or so merchants from a foreign nation accepted this and said that they would allow the mercenaries to turn around and leave once they reached the 1,000-bird border pass. Afterward, it was entirely up to the merchants whether they obtained immense wealth at Bamboo Scroll Lake or died halfway, and funded a prosperous New Year's celebration for some bandits. In any case, their safety was no longer the responsibility of the mercenaries. Their journey through the war-torn nations was truly like a journey through hell on earth. The notion of starvation stretching across thousands of kilometers of land was no longer a mere concept that scholars read in the books. As the horse-drawn carriages trundled forward, the merchants would often come across thatched stores that were filled with shouting and wailing as humans were sold for consumption. In the beginning, some people were unwilling to personally hand their children over to the butchers and onto the chopping boards, so they came up with an idea to swap their emaciated children with other parents first before selling these children to the human butchers. Many starving refugees gathered together and wandered around the Stone Brush Nation like zombies and ghosts, mindlessly rushing toward any location that might have some food. The beacon towers, relay stations, and temporary forts built by the wealthy clans all had blood spilled on their lands. Some of them even had corpses that they didn't yet have time to dispose of. The convoy of horse-drawn carriages had once trundled past a large fort protected by 500 strong young men from the clan, and the merchants had spent an exorbitant sum of money to buy a piddling amount of food. A brave young man from the clan had been envious of a bow owned by a mercenary for the merchants, so he had struck up a conversation and pointed at a row of shriveled heads stabbed onto the wooden wall outside the fort. These shriveled heads were used to deter troublemakers, and the young man had squatted down and chuckled to the mercenary that summer was the most annoying because flies were aplenty and the risk of plagues also became far greater. On the other hand, things would become far less troublesome once winter arrived and it started to snow. After saying this, the young man had grabbed a rock and thrown it at the wooden fence, accurately striking a shriveled head. He had then glanced at the mercenary who was looking at him with an expression of approval, feeling extremely proud as he did so. In fact, there was a young woman in green clothes and wearing a ponytail that the young man had taken a strong fancy to, and it was because of this that he had chatted with the mercenary and shown off his skills. The young man simply wanted to show off in front of the beautiful big sister. However, it was a shame that the young woman in green didn't so much as glance at him from the beginning to the end. This left the young man feeling very dejected and disappointed. After all, how good would it have been if such a divine beauty had appeared among the death-seeking refugees? She definitely would have survived, and as the grandson of the clan leader, he would have eventually been given a turn with her one day even if he wasn't the first in line. However, the young man knew that it was impossible for such a beautiful and healthy young woman to appear among the starving refugees. There were occasionally some women, yet the large majority of them were emaciated and severely tanned, making them look like starving ghosts. Their skin was also extremely rough and ugly. There was another slightly older young woman with a sword on her back standing beside the big sister in green, yet her looks were far inferior to that of her companion. Especially when it came to their figures, the gulf between them was like the gulf between heaven and earth. If the latter had appeared by herself, the young man would have indeed been attracted to her as well. Standing beside the young woman in green, however, the young man didn't have any time or effort to waste on her. The convoy of merchants continued to travel south. They often came across refugees who wielded sharpened wooden poles and blocked the road, while those who were a little smarter, or hadn't been starved into such desperate measures to be precise, would ask the merchants for some food before letting them pass. The merchants naturally ignored these refugees, continuing to travel forward without giving in to their demands. Generally speaking, the refugees would immediately scatter in fear once the mercenaries drew their sabers and bows. There were some refugees who would continue to charge forward with bloodshot eyes, wanting to cause chaos and steal some food and other necessities in the process. However, the mercenaries were all martial artists from the cultivation world, and they weren't citizens of the Stonebrush Nation either. Not only that, but they had also become numb to slaughter and bloodshed after traveling south through the Broken Nation, especially since so many of their brothers and friends had been killed as well. Thus, the mercenaries also harbored dark thoughts in the depths of their hearts, hoping that the refugees would charge forward to their deaths. That way, they could charge forward on their horses and slash down with their sabers, venting the bubbling anger in their hearts. Some of them would also have archery competitions with a shot through the eyes yielding the most points, a shot through the neck yielding fewer points, and a shot through the hearts yielding the least points. If a mercenary only managed to hit their target on the abdomen or legs, they would definitely be laughed at and ridiculed by their companions. Right now, there were relatively few people in the convoy, with only 10 or so merchants and mercenaries in total. Apart from the young woman in green who rarely showed herself, there was also the young woman who carried a sword on her back and was missing the thumb on her right hand, as well as a young man in black who seldom spoke or smiled. The three people appeared to be a group, and they always stuck quite close to each other whenever the convoy stopped to rest or set up camp. The leader of the merchants who cared more about money than their own lives was an old man wearing an azure chongshan. It was said that his surname was Song, so the mercenaries all liked to refer to him as Scholar Song. Scholar Song had two subordinates, with one carrying a raven staff diagonally across his back and one carrying no weapon at all. Both of them were around the same age as Scholar Song, and it was clear that both of them were martial artists from the cultivation world. Apart from them, there were three other people who were smiling on the surface yet had ice-cold expressions in their eyes. One was an ordinary-looking woman, and the other two were a grandfather and his grandson. The mercenaries felt like apart from Scholar Song, everyone else in the group of merchants carried a big ego and didn't like to speak. At night, they settled down at a rundown relay station that had already been abandoned by the petty officials. Everything of value had naturally been stripped clean as well. The young woman in green squatted down on top of a semi-collapsed mud wall outside the relay station. The sword-carrying young woman who never left her side stood at the foot of the wall and said in a quiet voice, "Senior sister, we only need to travel for a little more than half a month before we can cross the border and enter the territory of Bamboo Scroll Lake." The young woman in green appeared slightly absent-minded as she nodded in response. Scholar Song slowly walked out of the relay station and lightly kicked the young man who was sitting on the door threshold. Afterward, he approached the collapsed mud wall by himself, and the sword-carrying young woman immediately spoke using the official dialect of the Great Li Empire, saying respectfully, "I pay my respects to Palace Minister Song." The old man smiled and nodded in acknowledgement, saying, "There's no need to be so polite, Miss Sue. It's almost as if you're regarding me as an outsider." Scholar Song was a palace minister, not a doctor who worked in some pharmacy. 1. The refined and elegant old man in azure robes was none other than the palace minister of the Ministry of Rites Ritual Office. In vassal states like the Yellow Court Nation and the Stonebrush Nation, such a position was nothing more than a slightly more important minor official. Considering just the Ministry of Rites alone, the position of palace minister was inferior to assistant minister and even more inferior to head minister. In fact, a palace minister might one day have their position snatched by other assistant officials and external officials who enjoyed similar statuses. In the Great Li Empire, however, the position of palace minister in the Ministry of Rites was an extremely important one. In fact, Palace Minister Song was one of the three most powerful palace ministers in the Great Li Empire. His official rank wasn't high, being at the 5th rank, but his influence and power were far greater than what his rank implied. Apart from his ordinary responsibilities as the palace minister of the Ministry of Rites, he was also responsible for assessing and promoting the mountain and river deities of the empire. The Great Li Empire had always held off on assigning a river god to the rushing tranquil river, yet a river spirit called Li Jin had suddenly appeared from out of nowhere, going from the shopkeeper of a bookstore in Red Candle Town to the great river god of the rushing tranquil river overnight. It was said that he had achieved this monumental rise thanks to his relationship with Palace Minister Song, allowing him to become a lofty deity and enjoy incense offerings from the mortal world. The two young women were none other than Ruan Xiao and Su Xiaoqiao, disciples who had left the Dragon Spring Sword sect to train in the outside world. As for why they needed to venture so far away from the Great Li Empire, even Su Xiaoqiao and Donggu felt very surprised. Meanwhile, senior sister Ruan Xiao didn't mind at all. Seeing that Palace Minister Song seemingly wanted to discuss something with Ruan Xiao, Su Xiaoqiao took the initiative and left. Palace Minister Song walked over to the collapsed mud wall before sitting down cross-legged and saying with a faint smile, "I need to thank Miss Ruan for her magnanimity." Ruan Xiao put away her handkerchief, hiding it inside her sleeve as she shook her head and replied in a muffled voice, There's no need to thank me. Palace Minister Song smiled and asked, Miss Ruan, forgive me for asking this, but do you not care? Or are you simply enduring it? Is there any difference? Ruan Xiu asked. The old palace minister nodded and replied with a serious expression. If it's the former, then I won't take the extra step to do something unnecessary. After all, this old geezer also went through a period of admiring beautiful women during his youth, so I'm aware that young men like Li Mushi can't help but be swayed. If it's the latter, then I can make some suggestions to Li Mushi or his grandfather. Miss Ruan, you don't need to worry about this being an unreasonable request of them. This southward journey is an official trip requested by the imperial court, so people must adhere to the necessary rules. Miss Ruan won't be taking things too far by enforcing these rules. It's okay, he can look if he wants. It's not like I can control his eyes or anything, Ruan Xiu replied. Palace Minister Song couldn't help but chuckle in speechlessness. There were 2 martial artists from the cultivation world accompanying Palace Minister Song on this trip, one of them being a Vajrabhati-tier pure martial artist who was transferred from the army on short notice. When a high-ranking spy from the Green Ripple Pavilion had gone to the general's tent to ask for the martial artist, it was said that the general with dazzling military merit had directly smashed his cup and cursed in anger. Of course, he had still ended up handing the martial artist over. The other martial artist was also at the 7th tier, and he was the leader of a large force in the cultivation world of the Great Li Empire. As for the 3 other people, they were sticky rod officials who had been gathered together at short notice. The grandson was called Li Mushi, and he was a cultivation prodigy who was extremely skilled in the fields of talismans and formations. His grandfather, father, and he were all sticky rod officials of the Great Li Empire, but his father had been killed in a conflict not too long ago. Thus, this long southward trip was an official trip for the grandfather and grandson, yet it was also one that contained some private grudges. There were 2 tasks that they needed to complete on their southward trip to Bamboo Scroll Lake, with one being non-secret and not exactly minor either. Palace Minister Song from the ritual office was the leader of the group, and even the 3 disciples from the Dragon Spring Sword sect needed to listen to his instructions and abide by his commands. Many years had passed without any conflict-related deaths amongst the sticky rod officials of the Great Li Empire, yet 2 of them had died in quick succession during autumn this year. A golden core tier cultivator with a hidden identity, and from a foreign nation had secretly taken a disciple away. His disciple, a young man, was relatively unique, not only being an innate sword talent but also possessing some martial fortune. This had attracted the attention of several martial sages from the province. The Great Li Empire had been determined to recruit the young man, and even the imperial preceptor had regarded this matter with importance after hearing news of it. Perhaps it was karma, but what happened afterward was quite absurd and ironic. The young man had first been found by the sticky rod officials of the Great Li Empire, and the 3 officials who had discovered his talent had taken turns to watch over him and provide him with guidance. They had given it their all for 4 years. Yet the golden core tier cultivator who had been hiding his strength had suddenly leaped out from some unknown place and directly killed 2 of the sticky rod officials before snatching the young man and fleeing south. During his escape he managed to successfully avoid 2 traps, showing just how cunning and slippery he was. He also possessed impressive combat power, and the young man also displayed his astonishing disposition and aptitude as he fled. In fact, he had provided the golden core tier cultivator with huge help both times. In the end, intelligence gathered by the Green Ripple Pavilion showed that the golden core tier cultivator and the young man had fled to Bamboo Scroll Lake, disappearing without a trace after entering this area. When it came to this kind of pursuit, it wasn't just the Great Li Empire that would use all of its strength and resources. Indeed, none of the immortal forces in the mountains would be foolish enough to underestimate their opponents, and those who were more experienced and powerful would all seek to use their full strength to resolve the issues as soon as possible. They wouldn't act like those incompetent generals who continued to feed the flames, sending forth wave after wave of subordinates to die in vain and support the growth of their enemy, eventually nurturing an enemy that posed an existential threat to them. The elderly golden core tier cultivator was skilled at battle, and he was also enjoying a geographical advantage at Bamboo Scroll Lake. Thus, the team led by Palace Minister Song couldn't simply be regarded as a team with 2 golden core tier cultivators. Rather, the team could cooperate to achieve a combat power, rivaling that of powerful nascent tier cultivators. Regarding this point, Donggu and Su Xiaoqiao had privately pored over the details many times, leaving them quite confident in their assessment. Otherwise, if anything untoward were to happen to their senior sister, both Donggu and Su Xiaoqiao could say goodbye to their status as opening disciples of the Dragon Spring Sword sect. It was only reasonable that they could no longer stay at Divine Elegance Mountain. As for the other matter that only Palace Minister Song was aware of, this was a secret that pertained to relatively fundamental matters. It pertained to the ownership of the entire Bamboo Scroll Lake. Even he needed to act according to the instructions of his superiors. Even the island master who had secretly established himself at Bamboo Scroll Lake for more than 80 years was nothing more than a stone on the go board. After leaving the Great Li Empire and traveling south, there was one minor matter that Palace Minister Song found quite interesting. The young man, Li Mushi, was completely unable to comprehend what he was seeing and hearing as they traveled south, especially as they traveled through the Stone Brush Nation in horse-drawn carriages. In fact, he even complained about the main culprit in the depths of his heart. That was, he complained about the Great Li Empire, the empire that he called home. Perhaps in Li Mushi's eyes, there wouldn't be so many dead and starving commoners if it weren't for the heavy cavalry of the Great Li Empire marching south, or if they had been less brutal and cruel as they engaged in countless battles as they advanced. The raging war brought calamity to the commoners, and the innocent men and women were all reduced to a miserable state where they seemed like neither humans nor ghosts. On the other hand, Li Mushi's grandfather was indifferent to the tragic scenes. However, the young cultivator didn't explain anything to his grandson. "I heard that there's a child from Clay Vase Alley living at Bamboo Scroll Lake right now?" Ruan Xiu asked. Palace Minister Song nodded and replied. "His surname is Gu, and he's a child who enjoys immense fated opportunities. Lu Jimao, the river-severing true lord who rules over the strongest force at Bamboo Scroll Lake, took him as a closing disciple. Gukin himself also brought a so-called large catfish to Bamboo Scroll Lake, but that was in fact a flood dragon that possesses nascent tier combat power. Gukin now relies on his subordinate to cause trouble throughout the islands, and he's made a huge name for himself even though he's still very young. Indeed, even the luminous Vermilion Empire has heard about this little boy and his subordinate at Bamboo Scroll Lake. I was chatting with Mr. Su one time, and Mr. Su chuckled and remarked that Gukin was essentially a natural-born vagrant cultivator." Ruan Xiu raised her hand and looked at the slumbering fire dragon on her wrist that looked much like a bright red bracelet. She then lowered her hand and fell into contemplation. The middle-aged man arrived on the outskirts of Bamboo Scroll Lake, entering a bustling and prosperous city called Pond Water City. The man rented a horse-drawn carriage, and the carriage driver was a talkative old man who had traveled to many places in his lifetime. The middle-aged man was generous and enjoyed lively atmospheres and interesting stories, and he didn't like to stay inside the carriage by himself. Thus, he sat beside the old carriage driver for almost half the journey, offering the driver a large amount of wine and leaving him in a very good mood. The old carriage driver recounted many stories about incredible people and peculiar matters pertaining to Bamboo Scroll Lake that he had heard. But he said that Bamboo Scroll Lake wasn't as terrifying as outsiders made it out to be. There was indeed conflict and death, but the large majority of these violent matters wouldn't affect commoners like them. However, Bamboo Scroll Lake was a huge money drain, and this rumor was definitely as true as could be. In the past, he and a friend had transported some young masters from the luminous Vermilion Empire to Bamboo Scroll Lake, and the young masters had boastfully told them to wait at Pond Water City, saying that they would return in 1 month's time. Yet, only 3 days had passed when the group of young masters boarded a boat from Bamboo Scroll Lake and returned to the city. They were without a single copper coin, and the 7 or 8 of them had wasted away a whopping 600,000 taels of silver in just 3 days. Listening to the conversation between the prodigal young masters, however, it seemed as if they were still yearning for more. In fact, they said that they would save some silver for half a year before returning to Bamboo Scroll Lake to enjoy themselves. The middle-aged man appeared unremarkable and inconspicuous as he walked along the busy streets in Pond Water City. A group of chi refiners had been guarding the city gates just then, yet they hadn't checked for any passports or travel documents at all. Instead, one simply needed to pay some money to enter. Pond Water City was situated on the western banks of Bamboo Scroll Lake. Bamboo Scroll Lake was incredibly large, containing 1,000 or so islands of various sizes that dotted the lake like stars in the sky. Most importantly, the lake was brimming with spiritual energy. It would be a monumentally difficult task if one wanted to establish a force and obtain a large swathe of islands and territory. The middle-aged man carrying a sword on his back entered a restaurant on the bustling street, ordering a pot of Crocaw wine, the most renowned wine in Pondwater City. As he drank, he listened to the spirited conversations taking place on the neighboring tables. There was little information of use and only one matter that caught his attention. Bamboo Scroll Lake was seemingly about to host a 1-in-100-year meeting between all of the island masters, preparing to choose a new ruler of the cultivation world, a position that had already been vacant for 300 years. After enjoying his fill of food and wine, the middle-aged man paid his bill before leaving the restaurant and asking for directions to Ape Crying Street, a street that was open to everyone in Pondwater City. The street was 2 kilometers long and filled with immortal shops, and both ends of the street were guarded by chi refiners who also didn't check for passports or travel documents. All they wanted was silver. Pondwater City was quite similar to Old Dragon City, the #1 commerce city in the continent in this regard, what with their tendency to detest those who were wealthy and laugh at those who were poor. They only listened to those who were wealthy. If one doubted this, then one only needed to look at the wine in their cups. Every cup would first be raised to those who were wealthy. In this sense, it seemed as if the entire world were quite similar no matter where one went. The middle-aged man had a vermilion wine gourd tied to his waist, and he had heard from the carriage driver just then that one need not worry in Bamboo Scroll Lake, a place brimming with all kinds of people, as long as one could speak the official dialect of the continent. Even so, the middle-aged man had still chosen to learn the local dialect of Bamboo Scroll Lake from the old carriage driver. He was only able to learn a small amount of the local dialect, but this was enough for him to ask for directions and haggle with vendors. He continued to wander around the streets and take in the sights, not drawing any attention to himself and not entering a huge number of shops to purchase their most valuable treasures. Of course, he didn't just look and not buy, and he purchased a few refined but inexpensive spirit tools, behaving just like an ordinary chi refiner from a foreign city. He was simply soaking in the atmosphere, and he didn't act in a way that would make others look down on him. Similarly, he didn't act in a way that would make others look up to him. In the end, the middle-aged man stopped at a shop that sold antiques and other miscellaneous items. The products were quite decent, but the prices weren't especially fair. The shopkeeper also looked like a stubborn person who wasn't good at doing business, so sales in the shop were inevitably quite poor. Many people came and went, yet very few people retrieved immortal coins from their pockets. The middle-aged man stood in front of an ancient copper sword that was resting horizontally on a unique sword stand, not walking away for a very long time. The sword and scabbard were displayed separately, with one resting on a higher stand and one resting on a lower stand. Inscribed on the blade of the sword were 4 small oracle bone script characters, Great Replica Chu Huang. 1. Looking at the sword-carrying middle-aged man bending over and carefully examining the ancient copper sword, the shopkeeper asked in impatience, "What are you looking at? Can you even afford it?" Even replicas of the ancient Chu Huang sword cost a huge sum of snowflake coins. "Shoo, shoo, shoo, you can go somewhere else if you want to feast your eyes." The middle-aged man was most likely a spineless person due to his flat money pouch, so not only did he not flare up in rage, but he even turned around and asked the old man with a smile, "Shopkeeper, is Chu Huang the name of one of the 8 fine steeds that pulled the carriage for the etiquette sage and the first emperor of the mortal world when they patrolled the world together?" The old shopkeeper shot a glance at the sword-carrying middle-aged man, with his expression improving slightly as he replied, "At least your appraisal skills aren't so bad that you might as well be blind. That's right, this is none other than the Chu Huang of the 8 fine steeds." Afterward, a masterful sword blacksmith from the Middle-earth divine continent spent his life's effort to forge 8 famous swords, naming them after the 8 fine steeds. The blacksmith had a strange temper, and even though he was willing to sell the 8 swords, he was very particular about which continent the buyer of each sword came from. Thus he ended up passing away before he could sell all 8 swords. There are countless replicas of his swords, and this ancient sword that dared to inscribe the characters Great Replica in front of Chu Huang is indeed a very good replica. As such, its asking price is naturally very high, and it's already been on display in my store for more than 200 years. "Young man, you definitely can't afford this sword." The middle-aged man didn't try to show off to his own detriment, and he retracted his gaze from the ancient sword and started to look at the other trinkets and curios. In the end, he stood in front of a painting hanging on the wall. This was a painting of a beautiful woman sitting sideways and covering her face as she cried. If one listened carefully, one could surprisingly hear the faint sound of weeping coming from the painting. "Ari," the old shopkeeper chuckled and remarked. "Oh, what a surprise! I've actually come across someone who knows his treasures. After entering my store, the two items that you've observed for the longest are both the best items in my store." Not bad at all. You don't have much money, but your appraisal skills are indeed quite good. What, did you come from a wealthy family that eventually fell into decline? Is that why you started to travel around the cultivation world by yourself? Are you carrying a cheap sword and showing off a crappy wine gourd and pretending to be a wandering swordsman? The middle-aged man was unfazed as he continued to observe the mysterious painting. In the past, he had heard someone say that there were many calligraphy works and paintings from fallen nations that would develop feelings of grief and indignance under some specific circumstances. Meanwhile, some individuals in these paintings would become spiritual beings who wept alone in a heartbroken manner. He smiled and replied, "Whether or not someone is a wandering swordsman isn't determined by how wealthy or poor they are." The old shopkeeper sniggered and retorted, "Only naive fools who haven't spent 2 or 3 years in the cultivation world would utter ridiculous nonsense. You don't look very young, so I surmise that you've wasted your time in the cultivation world and learned absolutely nothing. Otherwise, you might have dipped your toes in a few places and treated that as traveling through the true cultivation world." The middle-aged man didn't become angry, and he pointed at the painting on the wall and asked, "How much does this painting of the beautiful woman cost?" The old shopkeeper waved a hand and replied, "Young man, don't embarrass yourself." The middle-aged man smiled and said, "What if I can actually afford it? If that's the case, then how about you give me 1 or 2 cheap trinkets? What do you say, Mr. Shopkeeper?" The old shopkeeper was indeed a little bored after looking after the store passed down by his ancestors for so many years, so he instantly developed a fighting spirit and pointed at a treasure located closest to the entrance, raising an eyebrow and replying, "Sure thing. Do you see that treasure shelf? If you can afford this painting, then I'll let you pick any 3 items you want from that shelf and give it to you for free. I'll adopt your surname if I so much as furrow my brows." The middle-aged man smiled and nodded in response. The old shopkeeper hesitated for a moment before continuing, "I won't say anything else about the origin of this painting, since I'm sure that you're already aware of its value. 3 lesser heat coins. If you can afford it, then the painting is yours. Otherwise, hurry up and scram." The middle-aged man glanced back at the painting on the wall before looking at the old shopkeeper again and asking if the price couldn't be negotiated, to which the old shopkeeper smiled coldly and nodded in response. The middle-aged man turned around again, looking at the painting for a while longer before glancing around the empty store as well as the entrance. Only then did he walk to the counter and flick his wrist, slapping 3 immortal coins onto the counter. He covered the coins with his hand as it pushed it toward the old shopkeeper, and the latter also glanced at the store entrance before rapidly placing his hand over the immortal coins the instant that the middle-aged man raised his hand. He dragged the coins over and lifted his hand slightly, grabbing them in his palm and placing them in his sleeve after confirming that they were indeed 3 genuine lesser heat coins. He looked up and chuckled. "It looks like I was wrong this time. Not bad, young man, it looks like you are indeed quite capable. You even managed to trick me. Someone who has already mastered the ability to see through everything." The middle-aged man smiled in exasperation and said, "Then I'll go over there to pick 3 items that I want." The old shopkeeper laughed loudly, walking out from behind the counter and saying, "Go ahead. As a shopkeeper, it's integral that I keep this level of trust. I'll help you package the painting first, and you can rest assured that it will be packaged well. In fact, just the box alone is worth 2 snowflake coins, so it's only natural that it won't damage this valuable painting." The middle-aged man walked over to the treasure shelf near the entrance, with his eyes wandering over the treasures as the old shopkeeper carefully removed the painting from the wall. As he placed the painting into the exquisite box, he continued to observe the middle-aged man out of the corners of his eyes. Bloody hell, if he knew this person was so rich from the beginning and so liberal with his spending, then would he have accepted the gamble so readily? Not only that, but he had even wagered 3 items at once. He couldn't help but feel extremely pained at this moment. However, the old shopkeeper felt slightly more at ease after the middle-aged man picked 2 items, as he wouldn't lose much from these items. Yet his eyelids shuddered when the man picked the 3rd item, a black jade seal that was yet to be engraved by a renowned craftsman. "Young man, what's your surname again?" he asked hurriedly. The middle-aged man had initially been a little hesitant, but he resolutely grabbed the seal when he heard the old shopkeeper ask this. "My surname is Chun." He turned around and replied with a smile. "If I adopt your surname Chun from now on, can you please put the seal back on the shelf?" the old shopkeeper asked in a pitiful voice. The middle-aged man smiled and shook his head, replying, "As a shopkeeper, it's integral that you keep a certain level of trust." The old shopkeeper huffed and exclaimed, "If you ask me, I'd say that you should quit being a bullshit wandering swordsman or whatever. You should become a businessman, and you'll definitely be swimming in money in a few years." Even though the old shopkeeper said this, he had actually made quite a healthy profit in this transaction. He was in a brilliant mood, so he poured a cup of tea for his customer with the surname Chan in a rare display. The middle-aged man wasn't showing signs of wanting to leave straight away. The old shopkeeper was thinking about whether he could sell the great replica Chu Huang as well, while the middle-aged man wanted to learn more about Bamboo Scroll Lake from the shopkeeper. Thus, the two of them started to chat over tea. The middle-aged man learned many things that the old carriage driver had been unaware of. Bamboo Scroll Lake was an otherworldly paradise for vagrant cultivators, and those who were smart would enjoy a prosperous life while those who were stupid would suffer an especially miserable life. In this place there was no notion of good cultivators or evil cultivators, and the only thing that separated people was their cultivation base and schemes. Business was booming, shops were aplenty, and there were all kinds of weird and wonderful matters that one could wish for. Those who hit a dead end or suffered misfortunes in other places would often find a new lease on life at Bamboo Scroll Lake. Of course, they didn't need to dream about living a comfortable or extremely satisfying life. In any case, one could survive as long as one joined the correct force and was able to bring enough to the table. Regarding how one fared afterward, that would completely depend on their own abilities. Becoming a lackey who provided both money and physical labor for powerful forces was naturally an option as well. Indeed, there were some people who had endured pain and humiliation for many years, and eventually rose to become fierce and dominant rulers of an entire region. Time leisurely strolled past outside the shop. The old shopkeeper spoke with spirit and vigor inside the shop. An official nascent tier cultivator had once joined forces with a golden core tier sword cultivator, and felt like they could do whatever they wanted in the eastern treasured vile continent. They had swaggered around the continent, eventually deciding to host a grand banquet on a large island in Bamboo Scroll Lake, and sending invitations to all of the Earth Immortals and Dragon Gate tier cultivators in Bamboo Scroll Lake. They had announced that they would end the chaotic situation at Bamboo Scroll Lake, where there were many powerful cultivators yet no legitimate leader, saying that they would become the new leaders of the cultivation world in this region. 30-odd island masters attended the grand banquet, and not a single one of them had raised any complaints. In fact, they had either applauded and shouted in support or obsequiously nodded and spoke in support from the bottom of their hearts, saying that Bamboo Scroll Lake was sorely missing a powerful leader who could win over everyone, lest it remain a lawless and chaotic region. There were also some island masters who had remained silent. After the grand banquet concluded, some people secretly stayed on the island and started to eagerly display their loyalty, proposing plans and describing in detail the various forces in Bamboo Scroll Lake, and their strengths and weaknesses. However, what happened afterward was an event that all cultivators in Bamboo Scroll Lake, regardless of age, recounted with deep satisfaction even hundreds of years after the fact. That night, 400 or so cultivators from different islands had charged over to encircle the large island, using close to 900 immortal treasures and sending forth 200 suicidal cultivators raised by the various islands. The cultivators from Bamboo Scroll Lake had brutally overwhelmed and killed the extremely arrogant nascent tier cultivator and golden core tier cultivator. Those who displayed the strongest killing intent were none other than the disloyal island masters who had betrayed Bamboo Scroll Lake first. The middle-aged man listened very carefully, and he casually asked about the river-severing true Lord Lu Jimao as their conversation progressed. The old shopkeeper became increasingly spirited and energetic as he spoke. He said that the river-severing True Lord was truly extraordinary nowadays. A little devil had arrived 2 years ago, becoming the river-severing True Lord's closing disciple. He was even more impressive than his master, and he actually owned a petrifying flood dragon that brought death and chaos to his own sect. The little devil had gone on a killing spree, having his so-called big catfish massacre everyone in the residence of a guest elder, including dozens of open-collar ladies as well as 100 or so other people. Not only that, but the victims had also been killed in the most horrific way possible. Afterward, the little devil had killed his senior brother for some reason, leading to another violent and bloody incident. The big catfish displayed its vicious and bloodthirsty nature, snapping its maws with no further intention than the pure desire to kill. It left a trail of broken bodies and limbs in its wake. Afterward, the master and disciple had faced little resistance as they conquered many surrounding islands owned by various other forces. Those who obeyed them prospered, while those who disobeyed them died. It was said that the prepubescent little devil had also kidnapped many young and beautiful women, seemingly having his second senior sister train them into a new batch of open-collar ladies. Afterward, Bamboo Scroll Lake never enjoyed another peaceful day. Thankfully, those were conflicts between immortals that didn't affect remote places like Pond Water City. Afterward, the little devil with the surname Gu had faced several assassination attempts from his enemies, yet he had surprisingly survived all of them. Not only that, but he had become even more arrogant and domineering, further building his notoriety. He was also surrounded by a large group of cultivators with swaying loyalty, and these people had given the little devil the nickname, Prince of the Lake. During the new year, the little devil had also visited Pond Water City, with his convoy no inferior to that of crown princes from mortal empires. The old shopkeeper was extremely animated as he spoke, yet the middle-aged man remained silent the entire time. Evening arrived, and the old shopkeeper waved goodbye to the middle-aged man at the entrance of his store, saying that he was welcome to visit again even if he didn't want to buy anything. The middle-aged nodded in response. With the 3 treasures in his sleeve and the brocade box under his arm, he bid farewell and left the store. The old shopkeeper appeared slightly puzzled, feeling that the middle-aged man was a little dejected when leaving his store. This was truly very strange. He was clearly a wealthy individual from the cultivation world, so was there any need to feel so dejected? However, the old shopkeeper didn't think too much about this as he bobbed his head and walked back into his store. He had completed a huge transaction today, and it was truly the case that business would remain idle for long periods at a time, yet he would make enough to live for years on end once he completed a single transaction. In the future, which of those ill-intentioned bastards from the neighboring stores would dare to accuse him of having no sales skills? Regarding whether the middle-aged man would return to purchase great replica Chu Huang, and why his smile had eventually turned into a forced smile and then disappeared altogether as he fell silent, the old shopkeeper paid very little heed to these matters. At the end of the day, the conflict between the immortals at Bamboo Scroll Lake, the actions of Little Devil Gu, and the grudges and gratitudes that existed between the cultivators were all external matters and stories belonging to other people. The old shopkeeper had simply heard about them and retold them, nothing more and nothing less. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man walked slowly after leaving the store. Life wasn't a fictional story where happiness, anger, sorrow, joy, grief, delight, partings, and reunions simply existed on the pages. Book pages were easy to turn, yet the human heart was extraordinarily difficult to repair. Who had said this again? Was it Cui Dongshan? Or Lu Tai? Or perhaps Zhu Lian? He couldn't remember anymore. After walking a few dozen steps, the middle-aged man surprisingly stopped and sat down on the steps between 2 stores. He looked much like a dog sitting on the side of the street,